Chapter 47:11. Nine-Leaf Town. It was dusk, and smoke curled up from a small limestone bridge. Men, women, old and young gathered on both sides of the street. It was quiet and peaceful. However, this tranquility was broken by a black-clothed figure that suddenly stood up. "You're—" One of the men instinctively shielded the child behind him as he growled at the newcomer. However, his voice came to an abrupt halt in an instant. Blood streaked across the air. The man's body trembled before he fell to the ground, lifeless. "Run!" Everyone's expressions changed. When they regained their senses, they only had one thought in their minds. "Do you think you can escape?" The black-clad figure looked at the fleeing crowd. The killing intent in his eyes was slowly replaced by a playful expression. He was like a hunter enjoying the final struggle of his prey. In the next instant, the black-clad figure moved. Countless afterimages appeared in the air, spreading out like ripples. In just the blink of an eye, countless corpses fell to the ground. The fleeing crowd, regardless of whether they were men, women, old or young, were all dead. "It's time to move on to the next location." The black-clad figure sensed the surroundings. After confirming that there were no signs of life, the corners of his lips twitched coldly. With a flash, he vanished like a phantom. At the same time, faster, 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 faster. High in the sky, Nyetian flapped his wings. Like a meteor, he moved at top speed. However, there was only one thought in his mind: faster. He knew that if he was late by even a second, countless people would die a horrible death. Unfortunately, his speed had reached its limit. He could not move any faster. After a while, Nyetian finally saw the silhouette of Nine-Leaf Town. Damn it! Although he had not reached the nine-leaf stage, Nyetian could smell the stench of blood from afar. He was too late. "Who's there?" At that instant, a cold roar could be heard in the sky, followed by a tremendous force that came crashing down upon them. However, Nyetian did not dodge. He turned around abruptly and allowed the force to press down on him. His body did not move at all. His eyes were like a dark abyss as they locked onto a black-clothed shadow not far away. When the black-clothed figure saw that Nyetian was able to resist his palm, he couldn't help but be surprised. Then, he felt the terrifying killing intent in the latter's eyes, and his face changed. "You're from the Nine Lakes Sword Alliance?" The corner of Nyetian's mouth twitched. The killing intent in his eyes surged, as though it had materialized. "From now on, this place will be taken over by the Sword Alliance. I advise you to leave." The black-clothed man's heart trembled violently, but he still forced himself to remain calm as he spoke in a low voice. Of course, he could tell that Nyetian's strength was above his, so it wasn't a good time to fight him head-on. "Really?" Nyetianling smiled and said, "What if I say that I will take over this place from now on?" "You!" The black-clothed man suddenly felt the aura of death approaching. He cried out in horror, but he couldn't say anything else. His body trembled slightly. All the meridians in his body were severed and his internal organs were shattered. Like a broken leaf, he fell down powerlessly. "Nyetian, are you crazy?" At this moment, Baizichu finally arrived. When he saw the black-clothed man fall, he immediately turned to look at Nyetian and growled in a low voice. He couldn't believe that Nyetian dared to kill someone from the Nine Lakes Sword Alliance. "Can't you smell the blood in the air?" Nyetian's expression was gloomy as he said, "I'm not the crazy one. It's them." "You!" Baizichu was stunned and couldn't speak for a moment. Of course, he could feel Nyetian's anger, but these people clearly had nothing to do with Nyetian. Could it be that Nyetian was going to become enemies with the Nine Lakes Sword Alliance for these people? Nyetian ignored Baizichu. His figure flashed, and in the blink of an eye, he arrived at the main street of Nine Leaves Town. However, what he saw was a ground full of corpses. The smell of blood that assaulted his face seemed to be able to pierce into Nie Tian's flesh and bones, causing him to release an aura of rage. "Oh, there's still one who escaped?" Behind him, a mocking voice sounded out with a hint of playfulness. "Did you kill all of them?" Nie Tian suddenly turned around. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like a ferocious beast that had just walked out of hell. "You!" The black-clothed swordsman's heart skipped a beat. He was so frightened that he couldn't speak. Did the murderer ever think that he would become someone else's prey? Swoosh! In the next instant, Nie Tian's eyes darkened, and a ray of sword chi shot out. The moment the sharp blade tore through the air, the black-clothed man was directly cut into two. Bai Ziqiu, who had just arrived, saw this scene again. He was so shocked that his heart trembled again. It turned out that when Nie Tian was angry, he was actually this terrifying. It should be noted that this black-clothed swordsman had a cultivation base of early-stage human wonder. However, in front of Nie Tian, he was like a useless chicken and a stray dog, unable to resist at all. This guy is more suitable for that plan than anyone else. It seems like I made the right choice by informing the Grandmaster. Bai Ziqiu's eyes darkened slightly as he thought to himself. At this moment, a majestic force suddenly descended from the void, as if there was a giant hand pressing down from the sky. Bai Ziqiu suddenly raised his head, and the talisman under his feet appeared again. Mysterious light surged around his body as he resisted the mighty force. On the other hand, Nie Tian seemed to be unaware of it. No matter how the force pressed down, he remained unmoved like a mountain in a storm. Then, a surprised voice rang out and a figure descended. It was none other than Fong Nan, one of the Nine Lakes Sword Alliance's 13 swords. Almost at the same time, more than 10 black-clothed figures appeared and landed behind Fong Nan with a majestic aura. "Is it done?" Fong Nan glanced sideways at Nie Tian and Bai Ziqiu as he asked in a deep voice. "My lord, all lives within a 500-mile radius have been wiped out," a black-clothed martial artist replied. However, his eyes could not help but look at Nie Tian and Bai Ziqiu as if he was wondering where these two people came from. "I didn't expect there to be people like you in a remote place like Nine Leaf Town." Fong Nan's eyes were cold as he spoke in a deep voice. He was shocked when he sensed Nie Tian and Bai Ziqiu's aura. He really did not expect such an outstanding talent to appear here. Especially Nie Tian, whose aura was as deep as an abyss. "Judging from your aura, you must be Lord Fong Nan, one of the 13 swords, right?" Bai Ziqiu looked at Fong Nan and took a step forward before bowing slightly. "You know me?" Fong Nan's eyes narrowed slightly in surprise. "I'm Bai Ziqiu," Bai Ziqiu said respectfully and confidently. Fong Nan was surprised before he said with a smile, "No wonder you have such a cultivation base at such a young age. So you're one of the 9 young masters. If I'm not mistaken, Wu Songlong is your godfather, right?" "That's right." Bai Ziqiu's lips twitched as he secretly let out a sigh of relief. His godfather, Wu Songlong, was one of the Nine Lake Sword Alliance's Nine Lake Sword Alliance. In terms of status, he was much higher than Fong Nan. The reason why he knew about the Xing iron mine was from his godfather, Wu Songlong. Since Fong Nan had directly mentioned Wu Songlong, he believed that Fong Nan would not make things difficult for them based on their relationship. "Bai Ziqiu, you can leave now." Fong Nan's expression darkened. He then locked his gaze on Nie Tian and said in a deep voice, however, "His hands are stained with the blood of the 9 Lake swordsmen. He must pay with his life." Chapter 47:12. A life for a life. As Fong Nan finished his sentence, the murderous intent surrounding him could no longer be contained. Like invisible tentacles, it spread in the air, as if it was sealing off time and space. This, Bai Ziqiu's eyes flickered as he inhaled deeply. He could clearly sense the murderous intent in the air, which almost suffocated him. He had heard from his godfather, Wu Songlong, that the human emperor swordsmen of the Nine Lakes Sword Alliance were all Earth Marvel's realm experts, each with the strength to suppress an entire city. As one of the 13 heavenly swords, Fong Nan's strength was significantly stronger than the 17 earthly swords and the 19 earthly swords. Even with a conservative estimate, Fong Nan's cultivation was at the early stage of the Earth Marvel's realm. Although the difference between the Earth Marvel's realm and the Human Marvel's realm was only one realm apart, the difference was like the difference between heaven and earth. Earth Marvel's realm cultivators could use the power of the earth and mountains to reverse time and space, which was extremely terrifying. This was why Fong Nan was able to seal off time and space when he unleashed his murderous intent. It was true that Nie Tian was strong, but was he really strong enough to fight against an Earth Marvel's realm expert? According to Bai Zichio's knowledge, even the 2 strongest among the 8 childs might not have the strength to fight against an Earth Marvel's realm expert. You want my life? Do you think you're qualified? Facing the aggressive Fong Nan, Nie Tian showed no sign of fear. With a slight twist of his feet, a sharp aura was unleashed from his body. Bang! At that instant, a muffled sound could be heard, as the aura of the murderous intent in the air was shattered. Fong Nan's pupils contracted, as his expression was filled with astonishment. Bai Zichio was also startled, as his eyes widened. Could it be that what he saw earlier was not Nie Tian's true strength? This guy's sword intent is so strong. The expressions of the people behind Fong Nan changed at the same time, as they were extremely shocked. As swordsmen of the Nine Lakes Sword Alliance, how could they not see the strength of Nie Tian's sword intent? But what was even more terrifying was that Nie Tian's cultivation was even stronger. To break Fong Nan's killing aura with brute force, one would need to be at least at the peak of the human Qi realm. However, judging from Nie Tian's age, he was even younger than Bai Zichio. How could he have reached such a high level? To be able to use sword Qi to break my killing aura, your talent is indeed amazing. After a while, Fong Nan calmed down and said with a dark gaze, Are you Xing Yichen or Zhua Kunlun? Xing Yichen and Zhua Kunlun were the 2 strongest among the 9 princes of the prison. Considering Nie Tian's age, and the fact that he appeared at the same time as Bai Zichio, it was not strange for Fong Nan to make such a deduction. You guessed wrong. My name is Nie Tian. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched coldly as he replied indifferently. Nie Tian. Fong Nan frowned and felt strange. Then, he thought of something and exclaimed, Are you the Taoist of Tiandao sect or the demon of Tiandao sect? The 4 most powerful forces in the Hell Punisher world were a sect, a demon, and the Twin Sword and Saber League. The sect and demon were the Tiandao sect and the Sky Demon sect. The Twin Sword and Saber League were the Godly Saber League and the Nine Lakes Sword League. Among the 4 forces, the Tiandao sect and the Sky Demon sect were known to be the most influential. However, these 2 sects did not want to have too much to do with the secular world, thus they did not have a strong reputation. As a matter of fact, the Tiandao sect and the Sky Demon sect were stronger than the Twin Sword and Saber League. Rumor had it that the Tiandao sect and the Sky Demon sect were founded by 2 senior brothers, thus they could be said to be of the same origin. Initially, the 2 sects had a close relationship, like a family. However, for some reason, the relationship between the 2 sects deteriorated, and in the end, they were almost irreconcilable. The Tiandao sect had a Taoist, while the Sky Demon sect had a demon son. These 2 had not been involved in the secular world for many years, thus they were not part of the 9 princes. However, rumor had it that their talents and strength were superior to the 9 princes. When Nie Tian announced his name, he had the word Tian in it. In addition to his unique aura, he was very different from the ordinary cultivators of the occult sect. Therefore, Fong Nan guessed that he was most likely the Taoist or Sky Demon sect's demon son. There's no need to guess blindly, I'm just a nobody. Nie Tianling let out a laugh and said, As for you, an expert of the Nine Lakes Sword Alliance, you bully the weak and kill the innocent. You've long lost your conscience as a martial artist. Conscience? Fong Nan could not help but let out a cold laugh when he heard the word, as if he had heard a joke, and said, "In this world, the strong are respected. The weak have the right to live, which is given to them by the strong. If the strong wanted them dead, it would be as easy as crushing ant." Nie Tian's eyes suddenly darkened as he said, "Does that mean that you're still alive now because of my kindness?" Hearing this, Fong Nan's expression immediately changed, as he said in a cold tone, "Kid, your strength and talent are indeed rare. However, if you think you're stronger than me because of that, then it's ridiculous. Make your move." The coldness in Nie Tian's eyes intensified as he said, "You only have one chance. You're courting death." Fong Nan could no longer restrain his anger, as he let out a roar. His aura erupted like a volcano, causing the surrounding space to tremble violently. Is this the strength of an Earth Mystery Realm martial artist? Nie Tian frowned, as he felt that Fong Nan's aura was extremely strong, far stronger than that of the Blood Demon sect leader and Bai Ziqiu. What a terrifying aura! Bai Ziqiu's expression also changed, as he immediately retreated 10 meters away. He had to admit that Fong Nan's strength had exceeded his expectations. He was stronger than most of the Earth Mystery Realm martial artists he had met before. "Kid, do you still think that you're stronger than me?" Fong Nan laughed madly, as a green longsword appeared in his hand. Sword chi surged from his body, surging in the air. So much nonsense. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched coldly, as he unsheathed the sword in the sky. A surge of sword chi shot out, piercing through the air. Bang! In the next moment, a muffled explosion could be heard, as the sword chi surrounding Fong Nan was shattered. He was forced to take a few steps back, as he staggered and almost fell to the ground. "You..." He steadied himself and looked at Nie Tian with a flabbergasted expression, his heart filled with astonishment. Nie Tian had used a single sword chi to break through the barrier of his sword chi. How was this possible? This, Bai Ziqiu, who was not far away, was also stunned by the scene before him. He inhaled deeply and was speechless. Fong Nan was one of the 13 heavenward swords, yet he was so weak in front of Nie Tian. How strong was Nie Tian? "If you don't make your move, you won't even have the chance to use your sword." Nie Tian looked at Fong Nan and said coldly, "Arrogant." Fong Nan was completely enraged, as the sword chi around him exploded once again, as violent as a stormy sea. "Go to hell." In the next moment, he let out a roar and slashed with his sword, causing the air to sink, as if it was about to be torn apart. The enormous sword shadow, with a terrifying pressure, pressed down on Nie Tian. "Watch out." Bai Ziqiu could feel the boundless pressure, and his eyes could not help but tremble. Chapter 47:13. Kaboom! Fong Nan was completely enraged. Under the attack of the sword, the air shook and a muffled sound was heard, as if it was about to collapse. Bai Ziqiu's expression changed greatly when he felt the surging aura. He could not help but take a few steps back. He did not expect Fong Nan's strength to be this strong. However, Nie Tian, who was under the sword shadow, was not afraid at all. His eyes flickered with a cold light and evil runes appeared at the corner of his eyes, making him look extremely strange. Just as the sword shadow was about to land, Nie Tian finally moved. Hum! The sword in the sky suddenly turned in the air, and let out a clear cry, like the cry of a dragon breaking out of the abyss. Then, a strange scene happened. Bang! The huge sword shadow paused in the air for a moment, then broke into pieces, turning into boundless sword chi and dissipating in the air. What? The scene before his eyes caused Fong Nan to be startled. He let out a cry of surprise, but he was unable to utter the words that he wanted to say. A sword mark suddenly appeared on his neck. Then, his head fell to the ground silently. This shocking scene caused everyone's eyes to shake and they were stunned on the spot. Fong Nan, one of the Nine Lakes Sword Alliance's Heavenly 13 swordsmen, was beheaded by Nye Tian. No one would believe such a scene if they did not see it with their own eyes. Nye Tian was too young. How could he have such terrifying strength? Nye Tian, you. After a long time, Bai Zichu finally reacted. His eyes were still trembling as he looked at Nye Tian. He wanted to say something, but he could not. Thinking back, when he first met Nye Tian, he only thought of him as an interesting opponent. However, after that, Nye Tian had repeatedly defeated him. Then, in the Blood Demon sect, Nye Tian killed the leader of the Blood Demon sect and showed his shocking strength. At that time, Bai Zichu still thought that Nye Tian's talent was normal, and that he was not even comparable to the strongest two of the 9 great childs. But now, Nye Tian had completely shocked Bai Zichu with his absolute power, killing a heaven-warping swordsman with a single move. Such strength was probably rare even in the entire purgatory world. Most importantly, Nye Tian was still so young. How did he possess such terrifying power? I told you, he only had one chance. Unfortunately, he didn't grasp it. The corner of Nye Tian's mouth twitched as he glanced at Fong Nan's corpse and said in a calm tone, "You, who exactly are you?" On the other side, one of the swordsmen from the 9 Lakes Sword Alliance, who had been completely petrified, finally reacted and asked with a trembling voice, "When you kill those people, will you tell them who you are?" Nye Tian's eyes darkened as he glanced over cold. Following his voice, a strand of sword chi swept across the sky. Everywhere he went, there was blood everywhere. Over 10 swordsmen of the Sword Alliance fell to the ground, dying on the spot. Once again, Bai Zichu took a deep breath as he stared at the corpses in disbelief. He did not even notice when Nye Tian had unleashed his sword chi. However, the next moment, he raised his head and saw a shallow cut on Nye Tian's face. Although there was not much blood, a strange aura could be felt from it. What happened? Bai Zichu was astounded. He did not see Fong Nan injuring Nye Tian. If that's the case, where did the blood on Nye Tian's face come from? "Mister, since you're here, why are you hiding?" At that moment, Nye Tian let out a smile and said in a loud voice, "Why don't you show yourself?" Bai Zichu was even more astounded. He scanned his surroundings and did not notice anything strange. Even with his senses, he did not notice anything at all. His opponent must be a hidden expert. However, after Nye Tian's voice faded, the void remained silent. There was not the slightest fluctuation of aura. "Since you're unwilling to show yourself, don't blame me for being merciless." Nye Tian's eyes darkened and murderous intent surged in them. The sword chi around him spread in the void like thousands of invisible tentacles. Bai Zichu's expression changed greatly. He subconsciously stepped back, not daring to get close to Nye Tian. He could feel that the sword chi released by Nye Tian was extremely sharp, comparable to the blade of Windstorm. Once he got close, he would be torn to pieces. "Young man, don't be so hot-tempered." At that moment, a playful voice was heard. Then, a short figure gradually appeared in the void. It was as if he was isolated from time and space. The surrounding sword chi did not affect him at all. "Old monkey!" When Bai Zichu saw the figure in front of him, his eyes widened and he exclaimed. The person in front of him was short and had dark red skin. It was the 3rd hall leader of the Blood Demon sect, who was killed by Nye Tian not long ago. "You?" When Nye Tian saw the 3rd hall leader, his expression changed and he was extremely surprised. Back then, he had clearly killed the 3rd hall leader. He had even destroyed his soul. But who was the person in front of him? Even if there were people in the world who looked the same, their auras could not be fake. The person in front of him was the 3rd hall leader of the Blood Demon sect. "You're Nye Tian, right?" The 3rd hall leader laughed, completely ignoring the shock of Nye Tian and Bai Zichu. He said, If I'm not mistaken, you discovered me when the heaven-warping swordsman attacked, right? Yes. Nie Tian's eyes turned cold and he nodded. Indeed, when Fong Nan attacked, he sensed a strange movement in the void. Only then did he know that someone was lying in ambush, and the blood stain on his face was left by the third hall leader. It was obvious that the third hall leader was an expert in ambush and assassination. He had grasped the timing very well, attacking almost at the same time as Fong Nan. Moreover, the way he attacked was extremely secretive. If Nie Tian had not sensed it, he would have been a corpse after that sword attack. Perhaps if Nie Tian had not sensed the third hall leader's existence, he would have been killed by the third hall leader. In that case, Bai Ziqiu and the others would very likely assume that Nie Tian had perished together with Fong Nan. As for the third hall leader, he had never appeared. However, it was a pity that Nie Tian had already sensed all of this. You're really not bad. No wonder my spectral doppelganger was killed by you. The third hall leader smiled and looked at Nie Tian with a strange gaze, as if he was calculating something. Spectral doppelganger? Nie Tian and Bai Ziqiu exclaimed at the same time, looking at the third hall leader in surprise. What did that mean? The third hall leader who died at the hands of Nie Tian was a spectral doppelganger of the third hall leader in front of them? If that was the case, everything made sense. Although Nie Tian did not know what a spectral doppelganger was, he could guess that it was a doppelganger formed by a strange technique, which was why their auras were the same. As I thought, you're from the 100 shadows of 1,000 machines. At that moment, Bai Ziqiu looked at the third hall leader with extreme fear in his eyes. Chapter 47:14 100 Shadows of 1,000 Machines. Nie Tian frowned when he heard Bai Ziqiu's words. He was confused when he saw Bai Ziqiu's flustered expression. Bai Ziqiu was one of the 9 young masters and had the support of an expert. Why would he lose his composure now? Could it be that the 100 Shadows of 1,000 Machines is a terrifying organization? Oh? I didn't expect Master Bai to know about the 100 Shadows of 1,000 Machines. The third leader's expression changed slightly. He looked at Bai Ziqiu and his lips curled into a sinister smile. Tell me, how did you know? Bai Ziqiu's eyes flickered with fear. He bowed slightly and said, My foster father is Wu Songlong from the 9 Lakes Sword Alliance. He has seen your shade doppelganger and sensed a strange aura. After that, he warned me not to provoke your shade doppelganger. I don't know why, but after I kept asking, my foster father told me that the shade doppelganger is a secret skill unique to the 100 Shadows of 1,000 Machines. It was then that I found out about your shade doppelganger's identity. He lowered his head and did not dare to look at the third leader. Wu Songlong. The third leader pondered and a strange smile appeared on his face. He mumbled, I didn't expect someone else to know so much about the shade doppelganger besides the 100 Shadows of 1,000 Machines. Senior, you won't attack my foster father, right? Bai Ziqiu suddenly sensed something and raised his head to stare at the third leader. The shade doppelganger is a secret skill of the 100 Shadows of 1,000 Machines. The third leader sneered. He could no longer conceal the murderous intent in his eyes. This! Bai Ziqiu gasped in astonishment. For a moment, he was rendered speechless. Could it be that just because of what she had said, she was going to bring a fatal disaster upon her foster father? 100 Shadows of 1,000 Machines. I'm curious now. Right at this moment, Nie Tian suddenly chuckled and said in an indifferent tone, Master Bai, since your friend is interested, why don't you tell us what kind of organization the 100 Shadows of 1,000 Machines is? The third leader looked at Nie Tian. His figure was faintly discernible, as if he was drifting away from time and space. This! Bai Ziqiu was put in a spot. He didn't know whether he should speak or not. Young Master Bai, you don't have to worry about anything. Just say it. The third hall master was magnanimous as he said indifferently. Bai Ziqiu glanced at Nie Tian, let out a long breath and said, In the punishing realm, besides the four great powers on the surface, there are also many hidden powers. These hidden forces are not known by ordinary people, but their strength is not the slightest bit weaker than the forces on the surface. There are even some top dark forces whose combined strength is not inferior to the four major forces. Rumor has it that the 100 Shadows, 1,000 Opportunities, and the 7-Night Pavilion are the two strongest dark forces. It's said that the strongest assassin in the world of Punisher is in the 100 Shadows, 1,000 Opportunities. He has secretly annexed countless sections. Once upon a time, a Heavenly Wonder Realm expert spread the word that he wanted to spy on the 100 Shadows 1,000. The secret of the machine. Unfortunately, that expert died in his home the next day. Even his family and friends were slaughtered. Since then, no one dared to provoke the 100 Shadows, 1,000 Opportunities. After saying this, he glanced at the Third Hall Master, as if he was afraid that the latter would suddenly kill him. I see. Nye Tian smiled after hearing this. He looked at the Third Hall Master and asked, "May I know your position in the 100 Shadows, 1,000 Opportunities?" The Third Hall Master smiled, paused for a moment and said, "Seeing that you are already dead, I don't mind telling you a little bit more so that you can understand why you died. The leaders of the 100 Shadows, 1,000 Opportunities, are the Master of the 100 Shadows and the Supreme of the 1,000 Opportunities. Aside from them, there are the Third Soul, the Fifth Pardon, the Seventh Fiend, and the Ninth Peak. I am the Scarlet Devil of the 100 Shadows, 1,000 Opportunities, and the 7 Fiends." You are one of the 7 Fiends?" Upon hearing this, Baizichou could not help but let out a cry of astonishment. "That's right." The Third Hall Master's lips twitched slightly. He wore a playful smile on his face, as if he was enjoying Baizichou's panicked expression. "Are the 7 Fiends very powerful?" Nye Tian did not think much of it. Instead, he sneered. Baizichou took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. He then said in a low voice, "Years ago, the Heavenly Mystery Realm expert who provoked the 100 Shadows, 1,000 Opportunities, was killed by one of the 7 Fiends." He. The Third Hall Master laughed and said, "You are young, but you know quite a lot. That idiot was killed by the Ashcloud Fiend." "Is that so?" Nye Tian sneered again. His eyes were as sharp as blades. He stared at the Scarlet Devil of the Fiend fearlessly and said, "If Lord Scarlet Devil of the Fiend is so powerful, why would he use his ghost doppelganger on a piece of trash like the Third Hall Master of the Blood Demon Sect?" "That's right." Baizichou was stunned at first, then he exclaimed in surprise. Indeed, Nye Tian's question was very confusing. Why would one of the 100 Shadows, 1,000 Opportunities, and the 7 Fiends deign to mingle in the Blood Demon Sect? Punishment Iron Mine. However, the next moment, Baizichou thought of a possibility, and let out a strange cry. The Scarlet Devil of the Fiend smiled and said, "The punishment Iron Mine was just an unexpected gain. We don't want to interfere too much. As for hiding in the Blood Demon Sect, it's to gather information about the Blood Demon Ancestor." The Blood Demon Ancestor. When Nye Tian heard this name, his eyes couldn't help but tremble and he exclaimed in surprise. He was also looking for the Blood Demon Ancestor. The Scarlet Devil of the Fiend laughed and said, "Actually, the 100 Shadows, 1,000 Opportunities sect isn't too interested in the Blood Demon Ancestor. What we're really interested in is the person who seriously injured him." Dongwang Zhengrong. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed and he almost blurted out, "You know this person too?" The Scarlet Devil of the Fiend was also stunned. Obviously, he didn't expect Nye Tian to know about Dongwang Zhengrong. Nye Tian's eyes trembled slightly. He suppressed the shock in his heart and didn't say anything. "Ha ha!" The Scarlet Devil of the Fiend stared at Nye Tian for a long time before he suddenly laughed wildly and said in a loud voice, "I think I understand now." His eyes locked onto Nye Tian and said, "Speaking of which, you're quite similar to Dongwang Zhengrong." All the sects and factions in the punishing world are under the control of the 100 Shadows, 1,000 Opportunities. In particular, the 100 Shadows 1,000 Opportunities pays special attention to some young martial artists who are worth paying attention to. Whether it's the 9 princes or the Taoist and demonic heirs of the Tao sect and the demonic sect, the 100 Shadows 1,000 Opportunities knows them like the back of its hand. As he spoke, a strange light flashed in his eyes and he said, "Only you, the 100 Shadows 1,000 Opportunities doesn't know anything about it." In the past, Dongwang Jingrong also escaped the control of the 100 Shadows 1,000 Opportunities. And it was this unexpected person who almost destroyed the entire 100 Shadows 1,000 Opportunities. When Nye Tian and Bai Ziqiu heard this, their expressions changed at the same time. They were quite surprised. Bai Ziqiu was surprised that there was someone in this world who could single-handedly threaten the entire 100 Shadows 1,000 Opportunities. On the other hand, Nye Tian was surprised that apart from seriously injuring the blood demon ancestor, Dongwang Jingrong also almost destroyed the 100 Shadows 1,000 Opportunities. It seems that Dongwang Jingrong has done a lot of things in the prison realm. Chapter 47:15. You want to find Dongwang Jingrong through the blood demon ancestor and seek revenge, right? After a while, Nye Tian suppressed his shock and asked in a low voice. Dongwang Jingrong has disappeared for a long time. The battle against the blood demon ancestor was his last. Qi Devilsha smiled. Some said that the blood demon ancestor was severely injured and Dongwang Jingrong died. But according to our investigation, Dongwang Jingrong did not die. Not only did he not die, he wasn't even injured. To prevent any future troubles, the 100 Shadows 1,000 Opportunities must find Dongwang Jingrong. I see. Nye Tian nodded. The calmness in his eyes was frightening. Nye Tian, you are very similar to Dongwang Jingrong. The Crimson Devil looked at Nye Tian and seemed to recall something. A sharp look of determination flashed across his eyes as he said, "The 100 Shadows 1,000 Opportunities has already made a mistake once. It won't make a second mistake." Senior Qi Devilsha, you cannot kill him. But just as he finished speaking, Bai Ziqiu yelled, "Is that so?" Qi Devilsha snickered. "Young Master Bai, you can't even protect yourself and you still want to plead for him." Nye Tian, he is one of the 12 pillars. Bai Ziqiu's eyes quivered and he suddenly said. Qi Devilsha was startled at first, then he laughed. With his talent and capabilities, he is indeed the best candidate for the Heaven's Pillar project. But, at this point, he changed his tone and continued, "I feel that without him, those old fellows will definitely be able to find someone else to replace them." This. Bai Ziqiu's face darkened, not knowing what to say. Nye Tian, who was standing to the side, was astounded. He had no idea what the Heaven's Pillar project was, much less the 12 pillars. Senior Qi Devilsha, the Heaven's Pillar project concerns the survival of the 7 prison realms. Do you really not care? Bai Ziqiu forced himself to calm down and asked in a heavy tone. He. Unexpectedly, Crimson Devilsha laughed and said, "Young Master Bai, you are still too young after all. The 7 prison realms have existed for so long. Will they really fall just because of a broken pillar? I believe that even if the people from the Hell Suppression Guild don't interfere, the prison realm will be able to restore the heavenly pillars to their original state. As for the Heaven's Pillar project, it is only superfluous. It cannot be taken seriously." Bai Ziqiu did not expect the Scarlet Devil Fiend to say such a thing. His face turned pale and he was speechless. The Heavenly Pillar plan was related to the survival of the 7 Hell Realms, but why did the Crimson Devil Fiend make it sound like something unimportant? Bai Ziqiu, what do you mean by Tian Project? Tian Project, Tian said. He vaguely guessed that the plan might be connected to the survival of the All-Heaven Saints world. Senior Crimson Devil, I believe that if you insist on killing Nye Tian, even your Lord of Hundred Shadows and Monarch Thousand Secrets will be enraged. Bai Ziqiu ignored Nye Tian. He calmed down and bowed. Kid, are you trying to threaten me with the Hundred Shadows Master and Tian Tian? Qi Devil-Sha said with a laugh. Unfortunately, you're wrong. Not to mention that the Middle Sovereign and Middle Sovereign aren't concerned about the Heaven's Pillar. Even if they were, they wouldn't be as threatening as someone as powerful as Dong Huang Jingrong. If I kill Nye Tian, the Middle Sovereign and Middle Sovereign will be very happy. If that's the case, make your move. Nye Tian's eyebrows furrowed as a fierce light flashed across his eyes. Sword Qi burst forth from him, carrying a boundless aura. Kid, you're the first to provoke me like this. Qi Devil-Sha's eyes darkened. He took a step forward, causing the surrounding space to move with him. Bang! In the next instant, Nye Tian felt a great pressure coming from the rift, which shattered his sword intent. His figure shuddered violently as he took a few steps backward, before stabilizing his footing. Nye Tian. Seeing that Nye Tian and the Scarlet Devil-Sha were fighting, Bai Ziqiu was so scared that he couldn't help but let out an exclamation. Initially, he had already made up his mind to buy some time for reinforcements to arrive. He clearly knew that a few words would not be enough to shake Qi Devil-Sha's murderous intent. However, all he wanted was to buy some time for the senior to arrive. Once that happened, everything would be easier. Once the senior arrived, even if all the 100 shadows, 1,000 machines and 7 evils were here, they would not pose any threat, let alone a mere Qi Devil-Sha. In his opinion, even among the 100 shadows and 1,000 machines, only the 100 shadows Master and Tian had the strength to fight against the senior. The others were not worth mentioning. However, Nye Tian had taken the initiative to fight. Was he trying to get himself killed? Even though Nye Tian was talented, how could he stand a chance against an expert who was close to the peak of the Heaven Qi realm? I'm fine. However, after Nye Tian steadied himself, his eyes shone with a sharp light. He was actually filled with a strong desire to fight. Qi Devil-Sha blurted out in surprise upon seeing this. You're able to endure my force, it seems like I've underestimated you. Come on, let me see how strong the so-called 7 evils are. Nye Tian was not intimidated. The inverse celestial demon rune appeared at the corner of his eyes once again. The sword in the sky emitted a brilliant glow as a terrifying sword intent sealed off the surrounding space. He had already sensed that Qi Devil-Sha had the ability to control space and time, controlling the force of the heavens and earth. Therefore, he had to seal off the surrounding space. Otherwise, all his strength would be useless before Qi Devil-Sha. You're smart, but unfortunately, your sword intent is nowhere near enough. The Crimson Devil-Sha naturally saw through Nye Tian's actions, and he laughed as he lightly flicked with the tip of his finger. A shapeless force swiftly shot out and directly shattered the sword Qi barrier around Nye Tian, and it even forced Nye Tian to retreat once more. Puff! This time, before Nye Tian could regain his balance, he coughed up a mouthful of blood. Nye Tian, are you all right? Bai Ziqiu yelled in a nervous tone. I'm fine. Nye Tianling responded coldly and wiped the blood from the corner of his lip. There was no sign of fear in his eyes, but his battle intent grew stronger. He could not help but admit that Qi Devil-Sha's strength had exceeded his expectations. However, the battle was far from over. Kid, with your current cultivation, it's impossible for you to survive from my hands. Qi Devil-Sha said in a cold tone after sensing Nye Tian's battle intent. Is that so? The corner of Nye Tian's lips twitched. He took a step forward and unleashed the force of the stars in his body. A giant net was formed in the midst of the starlight, instantly covering a distance of a few 100,000 meters. This aura! Qi Devil-Sha's eyes widened as he exclaimed in shock. His expression changed instantly. After a pause, he said in a deep voice, You're really related to Dong Huang Jingrong. Chapter 47:16. In an instant, Nye Tian released his astral power. The surrounding space was covered in starlight. A formless spirit power enveloped both the Crimson Devil Sha and Bai Ziqiu. Dongwang Zhenrong. The familiar aura caused the Scarlet Demonfien's expression to change. His eyes were filled with rage and killing intent, like a ferocious beast ready to devour its prey. He couldn't be more familiar with the aura of the stars. In the past, the 100 Shadows 1000 machines had encircled and annihilated Dongwang Zhenrong 3 times, and he had participated all 3 times. After 3 rounds of encirclement, other than 3 souls, 5 pardons, 7 fiends and 9 peaks, even 100 Shadows Lord and 1000 Machines Lord had joined in. But in the end, Dongwang Zhenrong still managed to escape. During the 3rd encirclement, Crimson Devil Sha was heavily injured by Dongwang Zhenrong's palm, and he had to recuperate for several years before he could recover. This palm strike was the greatest hatred he had ever had in his life. Now, Nye Tian was unleashing the power of the stars. How could he not be enraged? This aura reminds you of Senior Dongwang, right? The corner of Nye Tian's mouth twitched, a playful look in his eyes. Since the Crimson Devil Fiend was enraged, then he might as well make him angrier. Kid, no wonder you look so similar to Dongwang Zhenrong. Turns out you two are really close. The Crimson Devil Sha revealed a gloomy smile as he tapped the ground lightly with the tip of his foot, and the imposing aura around his body erupted like a volcano and surged out, causing the surrounding space to rumble violently. If I remember correctly, the power you're using is called Star Power. Nye Tian's eyes were fixed on Nye Tian the whole time. That's right. Nye Tian vaguely guessed something from Scarlet Devil Sha's eyes. He smiled faintly and said, "Looks like the power of the stars left a deep impression on you. Kid, you're trying to anger me." How shrewd was the Scarlet Devil Fiend? How could he not see through Nye Tian's thoughts? He merely smiled and said, "But it doesn't matter. You are destined to die here today. Back then, I suffered a palm strike from Dongwang Zhenrong, and it took me several years to recover. It's worth it to use the life of Eastern Emperor Zhenrong's disciple to pay for this palm strike." Naturally, he thought that Nye Tian was Dongwang Zhenrong's disciple. Actually, it wasn't wrong to put it this way. But strictly speaking, Nye Tian and Dongwang Zhenrong weren't master and disciple, they were inheritors. You alone aren't enough. Nye Tianling sneered, his eyes surging with sharpness. The fiend god energy in his body surged like a volcano that was emitting thick smoke, waiting for the moment to erupt. Arrogant. Scarlet Devil Sha growled. Today, I'll let you understand how terrifying a Heaven Chi realm expert is. Boom. As the sound of his voice faded, he took a step forward. His small body was like a mountain, causing the space around him to sink. The totem that covered the sky began to shake violently. After that, numerous star runes appeared, and they actually showed signs of collapsing. Seeing this, Bai Ziqiu could not help but gasp and quickly backed away. He could clearly feel the powerful aura of the heaven-shrouding totem. It was extremely terrifying. He originally thought that with the heaven-shrouding totem, even if Nye Tian still had no chance of winning, he would still be able to hold on for a while. But unexpectedly, the Scarlet Devil Sha was so powerful that he could destroy the heaven-shrouding totem with just a wave of his hand. Nye Tian was also shocked, but he was still calm. He raised the sky sword high up in the air and slashed down. Instantly, a huge sword shadow pressed down on the Scarlet Devil Sha like a mountain. With his current state, he had activated the celestial demon body, but he was still so weak in front of the Scarlet Devil Sha. One should know that when Nye Tian was in the celestial demon body, he could fight against some of the weaker high-level heavenly martial divine ancestors in the all-heaven sacred realm. Could it be that the martial artists of the prison realm were stronger than the all-heaven sacred realm? Actually, that was not the case. Because Nye Tian was currently in the prison realm, the void was filled with prison energy, which had a certain degree of suppression on his strength. Although the power of the stars was not suppressed, it was not as smooth as when he was in the all-heaven sacred realm. Therefore, if the battlefield was in the all-heaven sacred realm, the Scarlet Devilshah would not be as strong as he was now. Bang! In the next moment the sword's shadow fell, but the Scarlet Devilshah shattered it with a backhand palm. At the same time, his figure broke through the layers of sword waves like a ray of light, and he slammed his palm towards Nyetian. Watch out! In the distance, Baizichu felt the terrifying pressure and shouted in shock. Nyetian's eyes darkened, and sword chi surged around him as the astral soul armor appeared on his body. Boom! Almost at the same time, a gust of sword chi was released from his body, and the sword shadow soared into the sky like a giant dragon, trying to break through the void in front of him. Bang! Then, the palm and the sword collided, and the outcome was decided. The sword shadow shattered immediately, but the dark red palm shadow seemed to be unobstructed as it pressed down with a loud rumble. Bang! Then, there was another muffled sound. Nyetian's figure was engulfed by the huge palm shadow, and the dark red waves surged like a roaring sea of blood. Nyetian! Baizichu was scared out of his wits by the scene before him, and he called out in a daze. One palm. Just one palm, and Nyetian was instantly crushed. Was the Scarlet Devilshah's strength so powerful? The dark red waves surged endlessly, and Nyetian's figure disappeared, as if he had been completely crushed. Humph! The Scarlet Devilshah sneered and murmured, "Kid, your talent is no less than Dong Wang Jingrong's back then. It's a pity that you met me too early. If I gave you 10 years, your strength would be enough to shock the entire Punish prison." Gulp. In the distance, Baizichu almost subconsciously swallowed his saliva. His eyes were blank, and he was completely speechless. Nyetian was the most suitable candidate for the Heaven's Pillar plan. Was he going to die just like that? Master Bai, it's your turn. At that moment, the Scarlet Devilshah suddenly turned around, and his eyes locked onto Baizichu like a sharp blade. Cold. At that instant, Baizichu felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave, and his entire body trembled uncontrollably. The Scarlet Devilshah's demonic aura was so powerful that even someone as heaven-defying as Nyetian could not withstand a single palm. How could Baizichu resist? Scarlet Devilshah, your opponent is me. However, at that moment, a cold voice suddenly rang out. Then, a figure covered in blood slowly walked out from the torrential blood wave. It was Nyetian. The Scarlet Devilshah frowned, unable to conceal his shock. You're not dead? He had never expected that Nyetian would be able to survive his blood-slaughter palm strike head-on. The power of that palm was enough to kill an ordinary advanced heavenly chi realm cultivator. Could it be that Nyetian's cultivation had already reached the advanced heavenly chi realm? But that was impossible. Nyetian was too young. It was impossible for him to have reached the heavenly chi realm. To reach the heavenly chi realm at such a young age, even the Tao children and demon children of the Tao and demon sects could not do it. But Nyetian had taken the full brunt of the Scarlet Devilshah palm. What was going on? Chapter 47:17. Crimson Devilfiend stared at Nyetian with indescribable shock and doubt. On the other side, Baizichu was even more dumbfounded. He stared at Nyetian in a daze, unable to utter a single word. He could feel the force from the palm earlier. Even the boundless pressure from the palm was unbearable for him, let alone a direct hit. But how did Nyetian manage to survive? Crimson Devilfiend, our battle has only just begun. Nyetian's eyes were crimson red. A strange black aura floated around the corners of his eyes, causing him to look extremely evil. His aura has changed. Crimson Devilfiend's eyes narrowed. He could keenly sense that Nyetian's aura had changed. It was slightly different from before. However, he regained his composure and said with a smile, "Nyetian, your strength has indeed exceeded my expectations. But it doesn't change anything. The difference between us is too great." "Is that so?" Nie Tianling let out a laugh and slashed the sky sword in his hand across the air. As the sword aura spread out, the bloodstains on his body were cleansed. What was even stranger was that the tip of the sky sword was surging with a pitch-black light. Even the aura of the sword intent was different from before. What's going on? Bai Ziqiu was indescribably shocked. He felt his entire body turning numb. It was as if Nie Tian had undergone some sort of transformation after the palm attack. Come, let me see what you're capable of. Crimson Devilfiend's eyes darkened as he spoke in a cold tone. Nie Tian was too terrifying. His level of threat had already surpassed Dongguang Jingrong's. Such a person could not be allowed to live. As you wish. Nie Tian let out a deep roar and slashed with the sky sword. The fiend god's sword intent in his body burst forth like a surging tide, causing the surrounding space to tremble. It was as if the heavens and earth were about to be torn apart by the force. Very good, you're finally doing something. Crimson Devil Fiend let out a maniacal laugh. Dark red waves of blood rolled around his body as he slammed his palm forward, shattering the boundless sword intent. Die. In the next moment, he slammed his palm out again. Waves of blood surged like the sea, crushing everything. Under the pull of this force, the surrounding void actually began to distort. Bai Ziqiu sensed an anomaly in space-time and retreated in fright. Fiend God Body, activate! At this time, Nie Tian let out a roar, the Fiend God energy in his body erupted, and the Fiend God True Body appeared outside his body. Bang! In the next instant there was a shocking explosion. The endless waves of blood were actually cut in half when they passed through the true body of the Fiend God. The Crimson Devil stabilized his figure and stared at Nie Tian with astonishment written all over his face. Blocked, blocked, blocked. Bai Ziqiu, who was watching from afar, was completely dumbfounded by the sight before him. Nie Tian had actually blocked the Scarlet Devilfiend's palm. Although the Scarlet Devilfiend was not a peak expert in the Punisher world, he was still a first-rate expert. However, Nie Tian was actually able to face it head-on. This was simply too terrifying. Kid, what kind of power is this? The Scarlet Devilfiend was extremely shocked. His eyes were filled with terror for the first time. Fiend God's strength. With the protection of the Fiend God True Body, Nie Tian was like a demon descending from the heavens as he yelled, "With a flip of my hand, I am a demon. Before the Fiend God, all are ants." Ants. The Scarlet Devilfiend could not help but roar when he heard this word. Kid, this is the first time someone dares to use the word ant on me after so many years in the Punisher prison. The power of the Fiend God is not something you can fight against. Nie Tianling remained solemn as his voice was laced with a murderous intent, sending chills down the spines of those who heard it. Presumptuous! The Scarlet Devilfiend roared angrily as the waves of blood around him churned. His aura was much stronger than before. Boom, boom, boom! Under the impact of the waves of blood, the void around him let out a low wail, as if thousands of dark spirits were groaning. Fiend God Blood, Thousand Hand Sun Burial. Just then, the Scarlet Devilfiend's voice exploded from within the waves of blood. Instantly, within the endless waves of blood, completely black hands appeared. Like snakes dancing on the surface of the sea, they looked extremely evil. This is... Bai Ziqiu was stunned by this scene, and he gasped in shock, unable to say a word. The Scarlet Devilfiend, who was close to the peak of the Heaven's strange realm, had activated the power of the heaven and earth. Complemented by the Fiend God Blood Chi, the amount of power he could unleash was unimaginable. It was not an exaggeration to say that even a towering mountain would be flattened in the blink of an eye under the thousand-hand sun burial. Where the Fiend God Blood Chi passes, all evil will flee. However, Nie Tian was not the slightest bit afraid. Instead, he took a step forward and the Fiend God True Body's strength increased exponentially. Everywhere the Fiend God True Body passed, the bloody hands were all crushed. How is this possible? The Scarlet Devil Fiend was stunned by the scene before him. He stared at Nye Tian in disbelief and screamed. Just what kind of power did the fiend god True Body possess? It was as if he was completely unafraid of the waves of blood. In the blink of an eye, Nye Tian had already arrived before him. Stepping on the endless waves of blood, he was like a fiend god walking amongst the mortals. You! In an instant, the Scarlet Devil Fiend felt a powerful pressure that made him feel an indescribable sense of fear. You cannot withstand the wrath of a fiend god. Nye Tian was like the arrival of a god. His sonorous voice was like the chime of a death knell to the Scarlet Devil Fiend's ears. Just as he finished speaking, the clear sky sword blossomed with light. The swift and fierce sword chi cut through the layers of blood waves. Like a heavenly rainbow, it suddenly descended, chopping down. Fiend God Blood Thorny Armor. When the Scarlet Devil Fiend sensed the sharp killing intent and aura of death approaching, he subconsciously let out a furious roar. Immediately, layers of blood waves surged, condensing into a dark blood armor that was densely covered with spikes around his body. However, it was too late. Bang! In the next moment, the shadow of the sword fell. With a muffled sound, a glaring crack appeared on the blood armor. Crack, crack, crack. Then, the crack expanded like a spider web and shattered layer by layer. Nye Tian, how could you? The Scarlet Devil Fiend's eyes trembled. He wanted to say something, but the invisible pressure in the void made it hard for him to breathe. Swoosh! Nye Tian was like an emotionless fiend god. The sword light suddenly fell. In the midst of the bloodlight, the Scarlet Devil Fiend was directly cut into two. He died on the spot. At the last moment, the Scarlet Devil Fiend's eyes were still filled with shock, confusion, resentment, and unwillingness. Unfortunately, he would never know how Nye Tian defeated him. With the death of the Scarlet Devil Fiend, the waves of blood in the void dissipated. Nye Tian stood in the air and looked up at the sky. What he saw was not the clear sky, but a black figure like a sword. That figure stood coldly in the sky. Although there was no sword aura around him, he gave off an extremely sharp feeling. It was as if, just by standing there, he had already split the world in half. Chapter 47:18. Nye Tian looked at the black-clothed figure in the sky and felt an indescribable fear. A swordsman. Even though the black-clothed person did not reveal any sword intent, Nye Tian could tell that he was a swordsman with a single glance. Furthermore, he was an extremely powerful swordsman. Nye Tian had not met many swordsmen in the past few days since he came to the prison. The strongest was Fong Nan, one of the 9 Lakes Sword Alliance's 13 swords that he had just killed. However, the person before him already made him feel much more terrifying than Fong Nan without revealing any sword intent. Judging from the black-clothed person's aura, he was probably a powerful swordsman that could dominate an entire sacred world. He's from the Sword Alliance. In the distance, Bai Ziqiu slowly recovered from his shock. His attention was quickly drawn by the black-clothed person as he blurted out almost instinctively. Almost all the powerful swordsmen in the prison were from the 9 Lakes Sword Alliance. Although Bai Ziqiu was not a swordsman, he was extremely sensitive to the aura of swordsmen. He could also tell that the black-clothed person was an extremely terrifying swordsman. Such a swordsman was almost certain to be from the 9 Lakes Sword Alliance. At this moment, the black-clothed person moved. He moved like lightning, leaving behind a scorching white mark wherever he passed, as if he was going to split the world in half. "Who are you?" Nye Tian only spoke after the black-clothed person came to a stop. He could tell from the person's aura that he was an extremely righteous swordsman. "You're a swordsman, yet you use such an evil power." The black-clothed person's gaze was cold and firm as he growled, "You've shamed the sword in your hand." "Evil?" Nye Tian's gaze darkened as he smiled. "According to Senior, a swordsman can't use evil power. A swordsman is righteous, guarding the world and repelling all evils. Naturally, they can't use evil power." The black-clothed person's expression was stern. His eyes burned with anger, but there was no killing intent. I understand Senior's words. Nie Tian nodded without fear. However, in my opinion, there is no such thing as good or bad power in this world. The key lies in the person using it. I've never seen you before. There are so many people who put on a sanctimonious appearance, but behind the scenes they do things like flies and dogs for personal gains. And some people who seem to be dishonorable can often do earth-shattering things. Preposterous. The black-clothed man's face darkened as he growled. It doesn't matter if it's twisted reasoning or heresy. Senior, you have your own way of distinguishing between them. Nie Tian softly smiled. He looked at the man in black and said, Senior, this junior has a question that I would like you to answer. Speak. The black-clothed man's eyes were cold, as if he didn't want to say anything more to Nie Tian. If a swordsman kills with a sword, is it the sword or the swordsman who kills? Nie Tian said lightly with a smile on his face. Of course it's the one with the sword. The man in black blurted out without hesitation. By the same logic, strength is not divided into good and bad, only talent is good and bad. Nie Tian smiled faintly. Swords are not divided into good and bad, but strength is divided into good and evil. The black-clothed man frowned and said, The power of righteousness can lead people to do good, but the power of evil can corrupt one's nature, turning one into a slave of strength and into a weapon to kill. Is that so? Nie Tian smiled and said, I admit that some strength is hard to control, but if you put the blame on the strength itself, isn't that too much of a joke? The power of evil shouldn't exist. Those who abuse the power of evil deserve to die. The black-clothed man's face suddenly darkened as he said coldly, Senior, you didn't come here to lecture me, did you? Nie Tian frowned slightly. He didn't want to argue any further. I came here to kill you. The black-clothed man didn't avoid the topic and said with a strange look in his eyes, But I can see that you're a rare sword talent. If you're willing to give up the power of evil and focus on the righteous way of the sword, I can spare your life and take you in as my disciple. Nie Tian's lips twitched and he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The black-clothed man was indeed righteous and honest. Think about it carefully, you must think it through. Seeing that Nie Tian didn't reply, the black-clothed man reminded him. Thank you for your kind intentions, Senior. Nie Tian's expression turned serious and said, But I'm confident that I can still control my own strength. As for becoming your disciple, let's talk about it in the future. So you're rejecting me? The black-clothed man seemed to be stunned, obviously surprised by Nie Tian's answer. He paused and said, Do you know who I am? Nie Tian shook his head. I'm Zhu Jingyi, a swordsman of the Nine Lakes Sword Alliance. Zhu Jingyi's eyes darkened as he said. His eyes were fixed on Nie Tian, as if he was expecting the latter to give him a response. Unfortunately, Nie Tian only nodded and didn't have much of a reaction. Senior, you're one of the three absolutes of black and yellow. Bai Ziqiu, who had already walked over, exclaimed in surprise when he heard Zhu Jingyi's name. 3 absolutes of black and yellow. Nie Tian murmured and immediately remembered what Bai Ziqiu had said. The Nine Lakes Sword Alliance was one of the 4 major forces in the punishing world and had countless powerful swordsmen. The 3 absolutes of black and yellow were the swordsmen who were second only to the leader, Sword Sect. It turned out that Zhu Jingyi was one of the 3 absolutes of black and yellow. No wonder his aura was so sharp. Your talent is not bad, but compared to him, you're far behind. Zhu Jingyi glanced at Bai Ziqiu and said, Well, I know. Bai Ziqiu was slightly embarrassed. He smiled and said respectfully, Lord Sky Sword, my foster father is Wu Songlong. Wu Songlong? I've never heard of him. Who knew that Zhu Jingyi would frown and shake his head? This. Bai Ziqiu's face turned red and he was speechless. He had said Wu Songlong's name to get close to him, but he didn't expect Zhu Jingyi to have never heard of Wu Songlong. Wu Songlong was one of the 9 Grandmaster Swordsmen of the Sword Alliance. Although he wasn't as good as the 3 absolutes of black and yellow, he was close. Zhu Jingyi had said he had never heard of Wu Songlong's name. But he wasn't lying. Although Zhu Jingyi was a swordsman of the Sword Alliance, he had never carried out any tasks of the Sword Alliance. He had spent most of his life cultivating. He had only appeared this time because he had sensed a strange sword essence aura when he was cultivating nearby. The reason why he wanted to kill Nie Tian was because he had sensed the aura of a swordsman of the Sword Alliance on Nie Tian. 3 absolutes of black and yellow, heaven, earth, and human swords. Each of them was a top swordsman. Zhu Jingyi was the leader of the 3 absolutes of black and yellow, sky sword. Therefore, he had said that he wanted to take Nie Tian as his disciple because he cherished talent. However, Nie Tian didn't appreciate it. Have you thought about it? After a while, Zhu Jingyi spoke again and asked directly. I've thought about it again, and I still insist on my original opinion. Nie Tian smiled faintly and bowed slightly. But if you want to kill me, you have to hear me out first. Chapter 47:19. Zhu Jingyi had spent his entire life cultivating. His heart of the sword was pure and unaffected by the outside world. That was why he had reached the peak. However, it was also because of this that he could not see the filthy side of the world. There was nothing wrong with using the sword to observe the world, observe people, and observe all kinds of situations. What was wrong was that Zhu Jingyi's sword was too pure, and he could not see the truth of the world. Senior, if you don't believe me, you can take a look at the corpses below. After a long time, Nie Tian spoke again. You are a swordsman. You will know who left the wounds on the corpses. Zhu Jingyi looked up at Nie Tian. After staring at him for a while, he blurred into motion and vanished like a streak of light. Nie Tian, you. After Zhu Jingyi left, Bai Ziqiu looked at Nie Tian. He wanted to say something but hesitated. He's too pure. Nie Tian naturally knew what Bai Ziqiu was thinking. He smiled bitterly and said, He's not the one who's wrong. It's us and the world. We? Bai Ziqiu was taken aback for a moment before he asked in astonishment, You're wrong too? He remembered that Nie Tian did not believe in the rule of the strong. Otherwise, he would not have killed the Blood Demon Sect Master in front of him. In his opinion, Nie Tian was already very stubborn. However, Zhu Jingyi was even more stubborn and naive. If Bai Ziqiu had not seen it with his own eyes, he would not have believed that the famous Sword League's triultimate divine sword was such a person. The people of the Sword League killed the people of Nine Leaf Town, and I killed the people of the Sword League. What difference is there between my actions and the people of the Sword League? Nie Tian shook his head with a bitter smile and sighed helplessly. This. Bai Ziqiu was at a loss for words. Watch out. At that moment, Nie Tian's expression suddenly changed. He pushed Bai Ziqiu away with a powerful palm force. Bai Ziqiu did not know what was going on. Just as he was wondering what was going on, he saw a golden ray fly past his cheek, leaving a deep gash on his face. Who's there? In the next moment, he steadied himself, looked into the distance, and let out a low roar. That person isn't here yet. However, Nie Tian's gaze was downcast. Although he was trying his best to remain calm, there was a hint of nervousness in his voice. Bai Ziqiu swallowed a mouthful of saliva. His face was filled with panic as he looked around, but he had no idea where the person who had attacked him was. Kid, your reaction is quite sharp. A moment later, a burst of hearty laughter rang out as a streak of light descended from the sky, landing before Nie Tian and Bai Ziqiu. Chapter 47:20. Upon hearing Duan Hun's words, Nie Tian's face darkened. The 3 spirits were stronger than the 7 malevolent spirits. Therefore, the strength of the Soulbreaker was definitely stronger than the Scarlet Devil Shah. The reason why he was able to win the battle against the Scarlet Devil Shah was because of his true form. but now, he had almost depleted all the energy in his body. There was no way he could continue fighting. Without Zhu Jingyi, he and Bai Ziqiu would indeed have a slim chance of survival. Alright, that's enough. The Soul Breaker spoke once again. His figure flickered with murderous intent. In the blink of an eye, Nie Tian sensed imminent danger. His expression flickered as he opened his eyes and unleashed his eye power. Puff! In the next instant, a faint noise took place in the air, as if two extremely weak forces had collided with one another. Following this, Nie Tian's figure shuddered as he took a few steps back. He stumbled and could no longer stand. Nie Tian, are you all right? Bai Ziqiu did not even see what had just happened. He immediately went up to support Nie Tian, only to see that there was blood leaking out from the corner of his eyes. His pupils were as dark as the abyss. This, Bai Ziqiu inhaled deeply. The astonishment in his heart was unbearable. What had just happened? What had happened to Nie Tian? I'm fine. Nie Tian endured the pain in his soul. He had just opened his mouth when blood began to leak out from the corner of his lip. Bai Ziqiu held onto Nie Tian. His face was as white as a sheet of paper. He had no idea how dangerous the situation was just now. At that instant, the Soul Breaker had unleashed the soul-killing blow, but it was blocked by Nie Tian's eye technique. Nie Tian could clearly feel the soul-killing blow being blocked half a meter in front of his forehead. If it weren't for the power of the eyes of the celestial demon, the soul-killing blow would have instantly killed Nie Tian and Bai Ziqiu's soul. It was obvious that the Soul Breaker, as his name suggested, was most terrifying when it came to soul attacks. However, although Nie Tian had blocked the soul killer attack, his eyes and divine soul had similarly suffered a great impact, and his injuries were not small. This was especially true for his divine soul. Under the agitation of this ultimate soul power, it was actually a little unstable and even showed signs of collapsing. Amazing! At this time, Duan Hun seemed to have recovered from the shock and shouted excitedly, "This soul has roamed the penal prison for so many years, but this is the first time that someone has been able to protect his divine soul from the soul killer. Kid, you've made this soul more and more interested. If you hadn't killed the Scarlet Devil Fiend, I would have taken you in as my disciple and taught you my soul-killing secret technique. Keep your thoughts to yourself. Your real opponent is here." Nie Tian propped himself up, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and sneered. Duan Hun let out a cry of surprise and his expression changed. Almost at the same time, a figure landed beside Nie Tian and Bai Ziqiu. It was Sky Sword Zhu Jingyi. Zhu Jingyi's expression was a little cold, with an inexplicable sadness. But he still protected Nie Tian and Bai Ziqiu behind him. He stared at Duan Hun and said, "Your strength is not weak. You deserve my sword. I've long heard that Sky Sword of the Sword Alliance is a sword maniac who doesn't understand the affairs of the world. Why do you have the time to meddle in other people's business today?" Duan Hun laughed and said loudly, "The sword maniac of the past is no longer here. From now on, Sky Sword has officially entered the world and will take care of all the injustices in the world." Zhu Jingyi's expression was cold, but there was a sense of pride in it. Duan Hun smiled playfully and said, "There are too many injustices in the world. I'm afraid you can't take care of them all. Then let's start with you." Zhu Jingyi's eyes darkened. A heavy sword leaped out from his back and floated in front of his chest. He said, "This sword of mine is called the Righteous Sword. But from now on, I will change its name to Righteous Law. Righteous Law of heaven and earth, Righteous Law of the world, and Righteous Law of the human heart." What a righteous law! Duan Hun immediately felt threatened. The sword essence on the Righteous Law sword made his divine soul tremble. He didn't expect Zhu Jingyi's sword essence to be so righteous and awe-inspiring. "Little rascal, tell me your name. Righteous Law doesn't kill the nameless." Zhu Jingyi stepped forward and the sword essence around him was like a waterfall. The void around him sank as if it was about to collapse. I am Duan Hun. Today, I will end your righteous law soul. Duan Hun was instantly irritated. He shouted and moved his body. He walked out of the light and shadow. He looked like an extremely handsome young man. Nie Tian and Bai Ziqiu were shocked when they saw Duan Hun's appearance. But they knew that this was definitely not Duan Hun's original appearance. He must have used some kind of special technique to change his appearance. Come on, let me see what the legendary Sky Sword is capable of. Duan Hun's lips curled into a sinister smile. His voice was also much sharper than before. Righteous law of heaven and earth, sword breaks the heavens. Zhu Jingyi didn't waste any time. He waved his sleeve and sent Nie Tian and Bai Ziqiu 10,000 meters away. Boom. Then, the righteous law sword was unleashed. The sword's shadow was like a waterfall that covered the sky. Its majestic momentum seemed to be able to suppress the heaven and earth. Nie Tian and Bai Ziqiu were still in the air. When they saw this scene, their faces were filled with shock. Even a talented swordsman like Nie Tian, who had seen many swordsmen with godly sword principles, couldn't help but be surprised at this moment. His surprise was not because of how strong Zhu Jingyi's sword essence was. In terms of the strength of the sword essence, Zhu Jingyi was definitely not the strongest among all the swordsmen that Nie Tian had seen. At least, compared to an expert like the Sun God Sword Emperor, Zhu Jingyi's sword essence was much weaker. But Zhu Jingyi's sword essence was the purest that Nie Tian had ever seen. This kind of purity was upright, unyielding, awe-inspiring, and righteous. It was the purity of being willing to shed one's blood and devote oneself to the world. The purity of this sword essence alone was enough to put Zhu Jingyi on the list of people that Nie Tian admired. Everyone in the world did things for themselves. There were very few people who were truly good people. But Zhu Jingyi was such a person who sacrificed himself for others. Holy light shines, common people cry blood. Almost at the same time, Duan Hun's figure also moved. Outside his body, there was a burst of light. His whole body looked like a scorching sun, sacred and inviolable. Bang! The next moment, the sword's shadow fell, and there was a loud explosion in the air. Boom, 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 chi, 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 bang, bang, bang. All of a sudden, the wild force rushed in all directions, shaking the heaven and earth. Endless wild waves raged as if to drown the heaven and earth. Nie Tian and Bai Ziqiu retreated again. They could no longer see Zhu Jingyi and Duan Hun. After a long time, the turbid waves in the void slowly dissipated. Two figures appeared. They were Zhu Jingyi and Duan Hun. Zhu Jingyi stood in the void coldly, regardless of the strong wind. His robe fluttered in the wind, like a sword god descending to the world. On the other hand, although Duan Hun was still standing, his body was shaking slightly. It was obvious that he could not hold on any longer. There was no doubt that the Heaven Sword won this battle. Using the heart as a sword, sacrificing oneself for the world, he would naturally be successful in every endeavor. Chapter 47:21. You've already rejected my kindness. What else do you have to say? You've already rejected my kindness. What else do you have to say? Zhu Jingyi's eyes became much colder. Even though he had the demeanor of a grandmaster, he was still in a bad mood after being rejected by a junior. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, "As you expected, I was the one who killed the dozen swordsmen of the Nine Lakes Sword Alliance. The heaven-warping swordsman named Fong Nan also died in my hand. Since you've admitted to the crime of murder, what else do you have to say?" Before Nie Tian could continue, Zhu Jingyi shouted coldly. He thought that Nie Tian wanted to defend himself against the swordsmen of the Sword Alliance, but he didn't expect the latter to directly admit it. "Senior, don't worry. Don't you want to ask why I killed those people?" Nie Tian seemed to have expected Zhu Jingyi's reaction and asked indifferently. "Speak." Zhu Jingyi's face was gloomy as he spat out a word coldly. Nie Tian nodded slightly and told him about how Fong Nan and the others slaughtered the innocent. That's impossible. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhu Jingji roared angrily. His eyes were like a ferocious beast. Young master Bai can testify to what I said. If there's any falsehood, you can punish me as you please. The corners of Nie Tian's mouth curled up as he spoke frankly. Zhu Jingji suddenly turned around and locked his cold eyes on Bai Ziqiu. Bai Ziqiu looked embarrassed and didn't know what to do. He was very curious why these seemingly ordinary things would make Zhu Jingji so angry. Speak the truth. Zhu Jingji stared at Bai Ziqiu and roared like thunder. Bai Ziqiu had a helpless expression and could only nod, admitting that what Nie Tian said was true. How could the swordsmen of the Sword Alliance kill the innocent? Zhu Jingji seemed to be struck by lightning and was stunned on the spot for a long time before he spoke in a deep voice. Bai Ziqiu was dumbfounded and couldn't understand Zhu Jingji's feelings at all. In his opinion, an expert like Zhu Jingji, who stood at the peak of the penal prison, naturally had a deeper understanding of the principle of strength than ordinary people. But judging from Zhu Jingji's reaction, it seemed that it was intolerable for a swordsman of the Sword Alliance to kill a few weaklings. Nie Tian stared at Zhu Jingji with a strange light in his eyes. He was not wrong. Zhu Jingji was indeed an extremely pure swordsman. Zhu Jingji had cultivated bitterly all his life, and his heart of the sword was pure, unaffected by the outside world. That was why he was able to ascend to the peak today. But because of this, he couldn't see the dirty side of the world. It was because of this that he couldn't see the world. What was wrong was that Zhu Jingji's sword was too pure, causing him to be unable to see the truth of this world. Senior, if you don't believe me, you can take a look at the corpses below. You Jingji. You Zhu. Nie. Jingji said. I Su. Zhu Jingji looked up at Nie Tian. After staring at him for a while, he blurred into motion and vanished like a streak of light. Nie Tian, after Zhu Jingji left, Bai Ziqiu looked at Nie Tian. He wanted to say something but hesitated. He's too pure. Nie Tian, of course, knew what Bai Ziqiu was thinking. With a bitter smile, he said, He's not the one who's wrong. It's us and the world. We? Bai Ziqiu was taken aback for a moment before he asked in astonishment, You're wrong too? He remembered that Nie Tian didn't believe in strength. Otherwise, he wouldn't have killed the blood demon sect master in front of him. In his opinion, Nie Tian was already very stubborn. But Zhu Jingji was even more stubborn and naive. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed that the famous Sword Alliance's 3 ultimate divine swordsmen was such a person. People from the Sword Alliance killed people from Nine-Leaf Town. I killed people from the Sword Alliance. What difference is there between my actions and those of the Sword Alliance? Nie Tian shook his head with a bitter smile and sighed helplessly. Bai Ziqiu was speechless for a moment. Watch out! At that moment, Nie Tian's expression suddenly changed. He pushed Bai Ziqiu away with a powerful palm force. Bai Ziqiu didn't know what was going on. Just as he was wondering what was going on, he saw a streak of golden light fly past his cheek, leaving a deep gash on his face. Who's there? In the next moment, he steadied himself, looked into the distance, and let out a low roar. That person hasn't arrived yet. However, Nie Tian's eyes were gloomy. Although he was trying his best to remain calm, there was a trace of nervousness in his voice. Bai Ziqiu swallowed a mouthful of saliva. His face was filled with panic as he looked around, but he had no idea where the person who had attacked him was. Kid, your reaction is quite sharp. A moment later, a burst of hearty laughter sounded. Then, a ray of light descended and landed before Nie Tian and Bai Ziqiu. The ray of light was shrouded in a dazzling white light. It was impossible to see the appearance of the person inside. Who are you? Nie Tian asked in a deep voice after taking a deep breath. Even with his fiend god eyes, He couldn't see the person inside the ray of light. When he probed with his divine soul, he felt that the other party was like a bottomless abyss. He couldn't sense anything at all. Kid, you're able to remain so calm in front of this soul. It's no wonder that Crimson Devilshah died in your hands. The person inside the ray of light spoke. His voice was clear and pleasing to the ears. You're from the 100 shadows of 1,000 opportunities. Nye Tian and Bai Ziqiu exclaimed at the same time. That's right. The ray of light spoke again. Crimson Devilshah's death was caused by his carelessness. However, he should be satisfied with the two of you dying with him. Dying with him? Nye Tianling chuckled and stepped forward, shielding Bai Ziqiu behind him. Do you think you're qualified? Ah. The ray of light burst out laughing. Kid, you're the first one who dares to talk to this soul like that. Nye Tian's gaze hardened as the light in his eyes rumbled. You're one of the 3 souls of the 100 shadows of 1,000 opportunities. According to Crimson Devilshah, other than the 100 shadows of 1,000 opportunities and the leader of the 100 shadows of 1,000 opportunities, there were 3 souls, 5 pardons, 7 evils, and 9 peak. This person referred to himself as the soul, which meant he was one of the 3 souls. That trash Crimson Devilshah didn't kill him, but he leaked the secret of the 100 shadows of 1,000 opportunities. The ray of light smiled. You're right. The soul is one of the 3 souls of the 100 shadows of 1,000 opportunities, the soul breaker. I knew it. Nye Tian's gaze hardened as the corner of his lips pulled into a strange arc. He obviously didn't want to fight the soul breaker. He wanted to wait for Zhu Jingyi's return. Kid, you're waiting for that stupid heavenly sword, aren't you? The soul breaker observed Nye Tian's reaction and couldn't help but chuckle. He's currently in great sorrow and can't be bothered with you guys. Master Heavenly Sword, Bai Ziqiu's expression darkened at once. If the heavenly sword didn't come, they would have died for sure. Baidu search Luan Book website. Luan Book website. Chapter 47-22. Hung Mountain Range, Sword Observation Lake. Walala! Just as Sky Sword Zhu Jingyi and Nye Tian arrived, the calm surface of the lake suddenly surged, as if there was a powerful force stirring violently under the lake. A huge pillar of water appeared on the surface of the lake. It extended into the sky like a giant snake. What a powerful sword intent! Nye Tian's gaze darkened. He was extremely shocked. The pillar of water was 400 to 500 meters tall. It looked extremely majestic. Nye Tian could clearly sense that the pillar of water contained an extraordinarily powerful sword intent. Even in the All Saints world, there were very few people who could possess such a powerful sword intent. Rumor has it that Lord Sword Master's sword intent is unparalleled in the world. It's my fortune to be able to see it today. Bai Ziqiu's reaction was even more exaggerated. He seemed to be in awe, as if there was a god in the pillar of water. Following that, an even more shocking scene occurred. A wave suddenly rose on the surface of the lake. It turned into thousands of strands of sword qi in the air, slashing at the huge pillar of water like sharp blades. In the blink of an eye, the strands of sword qi were like the most perfect craftsmen. They carved the pillar of water into a lifelike statue. From beginning to end, everything was done in one go. There was no pause at all. It was extremely enjoyable and joyful. Is this a woman? Nye Tian stared at the statue for a long time before finally confirming that it was a peerlessly beautiful woman. She's the Sword Master, Zhu Jingyi said with a cold expression. The Sword Master. Nye Tian and Bai Ziqiu were shocked at the same time. The renowned Sword Master, the sword's extremity, was a woman? In reality, Nye Tian had already guessed it the moment the statue was carved, but he was not certain. He was only shocked when Zhu Jingyi said it. It was not that the Sword Master could not be a woman. It was just that the strongest swordsman in the prison was a woman. It was indeed rather surprising. Sky Sword, you're here. At this moment the water figure spoke. Its voice was light and pleasant to the ears, as if it came from all directions at the same time. It was like a cool breeze caressing one's face, extremely pleasant to listen to. Sword Sect, I came to see you because I want to ask you some questions. Zhu Jingyi clasped his hands behind his back. For some reason, he did not look at the water figure. He seemed to be worried or afraid of something. Your eyes tell me that you've changed. The water statue spoke again. Its voice was still ethereal as it said, that is why I already know the question you want to know. Since you already know, do you have an explanation? Zhu Jingyi said bluntly. Tianjian, you already have the answer to the question you want to ask. The water statue actually smiled. The exquisite water surged, seeming to be a bit gratified as it said, you came here just to find peace of mind. You've been obsessed with the sword Dao all your life, and you don't care about the ways of the world. Therefore, your nature is the purest, untainted by filth. And now, your temperament is casual, but the innocence in your nature has not changed in the slightest. Perhaps this isn't a bad thing for your path of the sword. In the future, do what you want and don't have to worry about anything. Don't have to worry about anything? Zhu Jingyi's eyes suddenly darkened. A hint of anger flashed across his eyes. If I don't have to worry about anything, then wouldn't I be able to kill all the swordsmen in the Sword Alliance? It's their fault. It's up to you whether or not to kill them. The water statue seemed to have guessed that Zhu Jingyi would ask such a question. It faintly smiled. It's true that I am the sword sect's master, but everything in the world has its own rules. Haven't you heard that heaven and earth are heartless and treat everything as dogs? Heaven and earth are heartless and treat everything as dogs. Upon hearing these words, Nie Tian's pupils shrank, and his heart shuddered inexplicably. Is heaven and earth as cold as humans? I understand your attitude. Goodbye. Zhu Jingyi remained silent for a long time before he responded and was about to leave. Wait. However, the water statue stopped him. I don't know when you will return to Mount Heng. Don't you want to see my true self? There's no need. Zhu Jingyi's response was extremely cold. He did not even turn his head around. Tianjian, you can leave, but this young man has to stay in the Sword Alliance. The water statue's eyes narrowed as if she was slightly disappointed. She then turned to look at Nie Tian and said, I brought Nie Tian here, so he naturally has to leave with me. Zhu Jingyi did not back down and said indifferently, Tianjian, his identity is very complicated. It won't do you any good to have him by your side. The water statue was not angry. Instead, she explained patiently, I'm not bringing him by my side to gain any benefits. Zhu Jingyi said coldly. Nie Tian couldn't help but frown as he listened to their conversation. He could not understand why the Sword Sect's master of the Sword Alliance would be interested in him. Do you remember that person? The water statue suddenly said after a few seconds of silence. Who? Zhu Jingyi frowned and asked coldly. When you and I first joined the Sword Alliance, there was a mysterious guard by the former Sword Sect's side. He had the same cultivation as us, but he was able to fight against the two of us. The water statue's expression dimmed as if she had recalled many things in the past. She said, back then, the former Sword Sect's successor was him, but he did not care about the position of Sword Sect's master. After the former Sword Sect's death, he left Mount Heng and there was no news of him ever since. That person was indeed the strongest swordsman I've ever seen in my life. Zhu Jingyi seemed to have recalled many things as well. A trace of inexplicable emotion flashed through his eyes. He said, if he was still here, I would really like to fight with him. Looks like the pressure he gave you back then is still fresh in your memory. The water statue smiled and said, but I'm afraid it'll be difficult for you to find him now. He's dead? Zhu Jingyi's eyes trembled as if he was afraid of the answer. The sadness in his eyes was even more intense than before. I don't know either. The water statue shook her head. Then, her clear eyes locked onto Nie Tian and said, but from what I know, after he left Mount Heng, he changed his name to Donghuang Jingrong. Donghuang Jingrong. Upon hearing this name, Nie Tian's pupils shrank, and a look of astonishment appeared on his face. He was just wondering who the person that the Sword Sect and Tianjian were talking about was. How could he fight against the Sword Sect and Tianjian when they were at the same realm? If this person was still here, wouldn't he be stronger than the Sword Sect? He had a hunch, but he could not confirm it. Until the Sword Sect said the name that he was looking forward to. His shock and joy reached its peak. Donghuang Jingrong was once a member of the Sword Alliance, and he almost became the Sword Sect. After being in the prison region for so long, although there was no news about Donghuang Jingrong, Nie Tian had heard many stories about him. This made him curious. What happened back then that made Donghuang Jingrong disappear all of a sudden? Chapter 47-23. Zhu Jingji did not have much of a reaction when he heard Donghuang Jingrong's name, but his eyes were blazing with determination. Rumor has it that the last time Donghuang Jingrong appeared was when he fought with the blood demon ancestor. After that, he completely disappeared. The Sword Sect's water statue looked at Zhu Jingji and continued. Who won that battle? Zhu Jingji's eyes trembled and he could not help but ask. Although he did not care about worldly affairs, he knew that the blood demon ancestor was one of the 8 great grandmasters of the prison world. Even the Sword Sect might not have the confidence to defeat the blood demon ancestor, let alone him. Even though the Sword Sect had only mentioned it briefly, he could imagine that the battle between Donghuang Jingrong and the blood demon ancestor must have been earth-shattering. The blood demon ancestor was seriously injured, the blood demon palace hid, and Donghuang Jingrong disappeared. The Sword Sect's water statue nodded and smiled, but there was endless helplessness in his smile. No one knew the truth of the past, and they could only guess. Why did you suddenly mention him? Zhu Jingyi remained silent for a long time before asking. Don't you feel that Nie Tian's aura is very similar to his? The Sword Sect's water statue smiled and asked. Zhu Jingyi frowned and looked at Nie Tian. After sizing him up for a long time, he nodded. Nie Tian, what is the relationship between you and Donghuang Jingrong? The Sword Sect's water statue looked at Nie Tian. His voice was still light and pleasant, but there was a hint of pressure in it. Master and disciple. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and he replied indifferently. He could not explain the true relationship between him and Donghuang Jingrong, so he could only reply like this. You are his disciple. Zhu Jingji was shocked, and the way he looked at Nie Tian changed. Nie Tian did not say anything and only nodded. Zhu Jingji's face darkened. He then looked at the Sword Sect's water statue and said, Just because Nie Tian is his disciple, you want to keep Nie Tian here? Someone has their eyes on Nie Tian. With your strength, you cannot protect him. The Sword Sect's water statue suddenly looked at the sky and seemed to be thinking about something. Who? Zhu Jingyi's expression changed again as he asked in a low voice. Let's not talk about anything else. Just the 100 shadows, 1,000 opportunities alone is more than enough for you to handle. Sword Sect's water statue smiled and did not try to hide anything. Nie Tian couldn't help but frown, and he was puzzled in his heart. The Sword Sect didn't leave Mount Heng, but they were very well informed. Is it really safe for Nie Tian to stay here? Zhu Jingji clearly didn't want Nie Tian to stay, so he asked in a deep voice. I dare not say that I'm invincible in the prison, but at least in Mount Heng, no one can beat me. The Sword Sect's water statue smiled, and his voice suddenly became much colder and solemn, and it carried a dignified tone. Nie Tian, what do you think? Zhu Jingyi was silent for a long time before he looked at Nie Tian and asked. Nie Tian thought for a moment before he said with a smile, Since Lord Sword Sect is so kind, then it would be disrespectful of me to refuse. You want to stay? Zhu Jingyi was slightly surprised. He didn't expect Nie Tian to say that. Since Nie Tian is willing to stay, I will definitely guarantee your safety, and I won't let anyone hurt you. The Sword Sect's water statue nodded slightly, but it looked at Nye Tian with a slightly strange gaze. Zhu Jingyi frowned, and he was obviously unhappy, but in the end, he still said, "Since this is your decision, I won't interfere too much." After that, his figure flashed and he left, and he didn't even say goodbye to the Sword Sect. "Lord Sword Sect, how long do you plan to let Nye Tian stay here?" After Zhu Jingyi left, Bai Ziqiu looked at the Sword Sect's water statue and asked carefully, "If I remember correctly, you're Wu Songlong's foster son, Bai Ziqiu, right?" The Sword Sect didn't answer, but asked a question instead. "Yes, yes, yes." Bai Ziqiu's face was full of joy, and he nodded vigorously. He didn't expect that the Sword Sect would actually recognize him. However, he was also slightly curious. He had never seen the Sword Sect before, so how did the Sword Sect recognize him? "You want Nye Tian to participate in the Heaven Pillar plan?" The Sword Sect's warm lips curled up slightly, and he asked indifferently. "Yes." Bai Ziqiu nodded, and he added, "I will also participate in the Heaven Pillar plan with Nye Tian, so that we can take care of each other." "Then do you know what the Heaven Pillar plan is?" The Sword Sect smiled and continued to ask. "This, I naturally know." Bai Ziqiu was very proud, and he said with a smile, "The Heaven Pillar is the foundation of the 7 prison realms, but not long ago, one of the Heaven Pillars broke, causing the prison realm to become unstable, and it needs to be repaired. And the Heaven Pillar plan is to repair the broken Heaven Pillar." After that, he looked at the Sword Sect happily, as if he was a child who answered a question correctly and wanted candy. "Then do you know what the Heaven Pillar is?" Unfortunately, the Sword Sect shook his head and continued to ask. "Heaven Pillar?" Bai Ziqiu was stunned, and he almost subconsciously said, "Isn't the Heaven Pillar the pillar that supports the prison realm?" The Sword Sect laughed and he said, "Bai Ziqiu, you don't even know what the Heaven Pillar is, and yet you want to repair it. Don't you think it's ridiculous?" "Ridiculous?" Bai Ziqiu was stunned again, and his mouth twitched, and he was speechless for a moment. The Heaven Pillar plan was related to the survival of the prison realm, and repairing the Heaven Pillar was something that would benefit the people of the prison realm. How could it be ridiculous? "You can leave. Nye Tian will not participate in the Heaven Pillar plan." The Sword Sect didn't say anything else, and he signaled Bai Ziqiu to leave. "But Bai Ziqiu looked like he was in a difficult position, and he wanted to say something, but he hesitated. "Are you going to tell me that you've already told the person in charge of the Heaven Pillar plan about Nye Tian?" The Sword Sect could read Bai Ziqiu's mind, and he said directly, How do you know?" Bai Ziqiu's pupils contracted, and he was shocked. After spending some time with Nye Tian, he felt that the latter was especially suitable for the Heaven Pillar plan, and so he secretly told the person in charge of the Heaven Pillar plan about Nye Tian. When Nye Tian was fighting the Scarlet Devil Fiend, he was still thinking of helping Nye Tian buy time and wait for the person in charge of the Heaven Pillar plan to appear. But it was a pity that the person in charge of the Heaven Pillar plan never appeared. When he came to Mount Heng, he had been wondering why the person in charge of the Heaven Pillar plan didn't show up. Yet now, the Sword Sect had actually exposed his thoughts with a single sentence, and it was truly inconceivable. It was as if the Sword Sect was omniscient, and he could even see through people's hearts. "You can leave first. If the person in charge of the Heaven Pillar plan appears, I will explain to him personally." The Sword Sect fell silent for a moment, and he didn't say anything else to Bai Ziqiu, and he let the latter leave again. "This junior will take his leave." Bai Ziqiu wanted to say something, but he didn't say it in the end. After he bowed, he bid his farewells to Nye Tian, and then he left hastily. "Lord Sword Sect, what exactly is the Heaven Pillar plan?" As soon as Bai Ziqiu left, Nye Tian wanted to ask about the Heaven Pillar plan, but he was interrupted by the Sword Sect. "Nye Tian, you're not from the Purgatory realm just like him, right?" The Sword Sect's voice was clear and pleasant, but it contained a strand of oppressive aura. Chapter 47-24. On the Sword Viewing Lake. As soon as the Sword Grandmaster finished speaking, Nye Tian actually felt slightly suffocated, and he was almost unable to breathe. What shocked him even more was the Sword Grandmaster's words. The Sword Grandmaster actually knew that he and Dong Wang Jingrong were not from the prison realm. Nye Tian, you better tell me the truth. Otherwise, you won't be able to bear the consequences of angering me. The Sword Grandmaster spoke again. Instantly, the pressure in the air became stronger. Nye Tian felt as if there was an invisible hand in the air that was tightly gripping his neck, making it hard for him to breathe. Never had he imagined that the sword sect that was like a cool breeze and bright moon earlier would actually change so quickly. Yes, yes. In the end, Nye Tian nodded and admitted where he came from. As expected, the Sword Grandmaster's expression changed and the pressure in the air disappeared. She looked up at the sky and seemed to have thought of many things. She fell into deep thought and became absent-minded. Nye Tian didn't know what the Sword Grandmaster was thinking, but he was afraid that he would anger this crazy woman. So, he stood at the side and didn't move. He guessed that something must have happened between Dong Wang Jingrong and the Sword Grandmaster. Nye Tian, I lost my composure just now. After a long time, the Sword Grandmaster finally reacted. She smiled bitterly and said, It's just to clear a knot in my heart. Don't mind it. A knot. These 3 words made Nye Tian's eyes narrow. He was even more certain that the Sword Grandmaster and Dong Wang Jingrong had a special relationship. Otherwise, the Sword Grandmaster wouldn't have been investigating everything about Dong Wang Jingrong. Alright, if you have any questions now, feel free to ask. The Sword Grandmaster didn't ask any more questions. Instead, she smiled and returned to the feeling of a spring breeze. Lord Sword Grandmaster, what is the Heaven's Pillar and the Heaven's Pillar Project? Nye Tian didn't hide anything and asked directly. He guessed that Bai Ziqiu must have hidden something about the Heaven's Pillar Project. However, from Bai Ziqiu's reaction in front of the Sword Grandmaster, he didn't hide it on purpose. Instead, he didn't know the truth about the Heaven's Pillar Project. What is Heavenly Pillar? I don't know either. The Sword Sect Master went silent for a long time before he sighed lightly and said, It should be said that no one knows what Sky Pillar is. What do you mean? Nye Tian furrowed his brows in astonishment. Since no one knew what Sky Pillar was, how could there be a Sky Pillar project? Legend has it that the Heavenly Pillar is an important pillar that maintains the stability of the prison realm. If the Heavenly Pillar breaks, the entire prison realm will be in danger of collapsing. The Sword Sect Master naturally understood Nye Tian's bewilderment, and he smiled bitterly and said, But according to my knowledge, no one has truly seen Heaven Pillar with their own 2 eyes, so no one knows exactly what it is. I've read some scattered records about the Heavenly Pillar in the Sword League's library. That's why I know that there were a few attempts to repair the Heavenly Pillar in the history of the prison realm. It was also known as the Heavenly Pillar Project. But, she paused for a moment before continuing, unfortunately, none of those who went to carry out the Heaven's Pillar plan came back alive. This. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed, and he didn't know what to say for a moment. No wonder the Sword Sect Master didn't want him to participate in the Heaven's Pillar plan. Doesn't that mean that participating in the Heaven's Pillar plan is equivalent to suicide? Furthermore, since there was already a failed Heaven's Pillar plan, why would they still carry it out? Although none of those who carried out the Heaven's Pillar plan came back alive, the Heavenly Pillar was repaired after they went there. The Sword Sect Master saw through Nye Tian's confusion, and she nodded. Nye Tian frowned again, and he murmured, So you're saying that those who went to carry out the Heaven's Pillar plan sacrificed their lives to repair the Heavenly Pillar? The Sword Sect Master's eyes dimmed, and she nodded after a long time, perhaps. Then, wouldn't it be dangerous for Bai Ziqiu and the others to participate in the Heaven's Pillar plan? Nye Tian calmed down and shook his head. Bai Ziqiu seemed to be very happy to participate in the Heaven's Pillar plan, but little did he know that he was going to die. It can't be helped. The Heaven's Pillar is indeed very important, and if it is not repaired, the entire prison realm will become unstable. The sword sect master sighed helplessly. Since the heavens pillar is so important, why didn't the stronger martial artists repair it? Why did they send a young martial artist like Baiziccio? Nie Tian couldn't help but ask. There is a natural seal at the entrance of the heavens pillar, and it has a special requirement on the martial artist's bone age, talent, strength, and even willpower. The stronger martial artists cannot pass through the seal. The sword sect master smiled and explained. So that's how it is. Nie Tian remained silent. That's why no one knows the truth behind the heavens pillar. The sword sect master nodded and sighed. In my opinion, the so-called heavens pillar plan is to sacrifice the most talented martial artists in the prison realm for a short period of stability. Nie Tian's face darkened, and he remained silent. It was as if the heavens pillar was a greedy monster that devoured the most talented martial artists of the prison realm. Lord Sword Sect Master, why are you protecting me? After a while, Nie Tian suddenly smiled and asked. The Sword Sect Master did not let him leave the Sword League to protect him and prevent him from participating in the Heavens Pillar plan. However, he didn't understand why the Sword Sect Master would do this. Is it because of Donghuang Zhengrong? You are the disciple of an old friend. Isn't it normal for me to protect you? The Sword Sect Master smiled and said indifferently. Nie Tian nodded, but he was still worried. He felt that the Sword Sect Master was hiding something. Actually, there was once a person who entered the Heavens Pillar and came back alive. The Sword Sect Master suddenly said. Who? Nie Tian's eyes trembled and he asked in surprise. Donghuang Zhengrong. The Sword Sect Master paused for a while and said. Senior Donghuang. Nie Tian's heart skipped a beat and he was shocked. I heard about this from the previous Sword Sect Master. The Sword Sect Master nodded and said. He said that before Donghuang came to the Sword League, he represented the prison realm and participated in the Heavens Pillar plan. After a few years, the Heavens Pillar stabilized and everyone thought that everyone who entered the Heavens Pillar died. After a few years, Donghuang came back and changed his identity. He joined the Sword League and followed the previous Sword Sect Master at all times. After that, he left the Sword Sect and traveled the prison realm as Donghuang. I suspect that Donghuang's disappearance is related to the Heavens Pillar plan. Nie Tian's face turned solemn and he kept silent for a long time before he finally murmured, If that's the case then I must participate in the Heavens Pillar plan. The Sword Sect Master looked at Nie Tian and didn't speak for a long time. It's coming. After a long time, the Sword Sect Master's water statue suddenly looked up into the sky with determination. Chapter 47-25. Mount Hung, above the Sword Observation Lake. He's here. Nie Tian's expression changed when he heard the Sword Grandmaster's words. He looked into the sky but could not sense any abnormal fluctuations. However, he felt an unprecedented solemnity when he looked at the Sword Grandmaster's water statue. It seemed that an extremely powerful opponent was about to descend upon Mount Hung. A moment later, a dark cloud appeared above the heaven-level Sword Palace. It approached from afar, as if a dark cloud was pressing down on a city. This aura is so powerful. Nie Tian's face grew grim as he activated his demon eye. As far as his eyes could see, he saw a sea of blood rolling towards him. How was that a dark cloud? It was clearly a dark red sea. It's him. The Sword Grandmaster's water statue narrowed her eyes and seemed to be a little surprised. Did that old guy join the Guild of Prison Suppression? Lord Sword Grandmaster, who are you talking about? Nie Tian was a little curious and could not help but ask. You'll know in a moment. The Sword Grandmaster did not answer directly but nodded. At this moment, the endless sea of blood rolled over with a monstrous aura. The sky was like a blood-red curtain that covered the entire sky. Nie Tian immediately felt his breathing become heavy and he almost suffocated. So this is the true expert of the 7 great prison realms. He was silent and shocked. Previously, he thought that the cultivators of the 7 great prison realms were slightly inferior to the all-heaven sacred world, but his thinking changed at this moment. Rumble. At this moment, as the sea of blood pressed over, the sky rumbled continuously, causing the world to tremble. The gigantic water statue in the air was gradually unable to withstand the pressure and began to slowly disintegrate. Whoosh! Soon, as the pressure of the sea of blood continued to increase, the Sword Grandmaster's water statue finally could not withstand it anymore and collapsed, causing a huge wave on the water surface. At this moment, a black-robed figure slowly walked out from the sea of blood high up in the sky. Every step he took brought with it a huge pressure that caused the wind and clouds to surge. It's him. Nye Tion's eyes locked onto the black-robed figure and he was shocked. Even from afar, he could clearly feel the powerful energy surging around the other party's body. However, his face could not be seen under the cover of the black robe. Lord Sword Sect, Misery C has come to visit on behalf of the Hell-Suppressing Guild. Please show yourself. The black-robed man didn't seem to notice Nye Tion. Instead, he spoke in a loud voice. His voice was like a clap of thunder that shook the heavens. After a short moment, a vortex appeared on the surface of Sword Visualization Lake, and then a graceful figure walked out from it like a celestial maiden. Sword Sect. When Nye Tion saw that the figure was 70% similar to the water statue, he recognized that it was Lord Sword Sect, one of the 8 Grandmasters and the Blood Demon Ancestor. The Sword Grandmaster's figure was graceful and unafraid of the pressure of the sea of blood. Her voice was ethereal and sweet as she said, "I didn't expect you to join the Hell Suppression Guild. Blood Demon Ancestor." When Nye Tion heard this name, his eyes narrowed and he was quite surprised. He never imagined that the person who came was actually the Blood Demon Ancestor. Although he had never seen the Blood Demon Ancestor, he had heard of this name several times. This was because the Blood Demon Ancestor and Dong Huang Jingrong were inextricably linked. Back then, in Dong Huang Jingrong's last battle, his opponent was the Blood Demon Ancestor. After the Blood Demon Ancestor was seriously injured by Dong Huang Jingrong, he disappeared without a trace. In order to find Dong Huang Jingrong, Nye Tion had been asking about the Blood Demon Ancestor. Who would have thought that this guy would actually take the initiative to appear? Lord Sword Grandmaster, you must be joking. There is no Blood Demon Ancestor in this world, only the prison of misery. However, the Blood Demon Ancestor bowed slightly, showing a humble attitude. The Sword Grandmaster couldn't help but smile and said, "The Blood Demon Ancestor, who killed people like grass, has actually become the Hell Suppression Guild today. I deeply blame myself for the mistakes I made in the past. For the rest of my life, I only want to do what I can for the 7 great prison realms. I have no other request." The Blood Demon Ancestor laughed and bowed again. "Is that so?" The Sword Grandmaster smiled again and said, "I wonder if the prison of misery had this understanding before or after being seriously injured by Dong Huang Jingrong." There was a hint of mockery in his words. However, the Blood Demon Ancestor didn't seem to care. Instead, he bowed again and said humbly, "I know that Lord Sword Grandmaster is still brooding over what happened in the past. I am also deeply ashamed of what happened to the old Sword Grandmaster. If Lord Sword Grandmaster has any resentment, I am willing to bear it and will not shirk it." The Sword Grandmaster's beautiful eyes darkened and said, "Back then, you seriously injured the old Sword Grandmaster for your own selfish desires. Don't you find it funny that you are saying such words now?" The Blood Demon Ancestor was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he slowly took off his black robe and revealed an old face. His voice became a little shaky as he said, "I understand Lord Sword Grandmaster's feelings. If Lord Sword Grandmaster has any thoughts, you can say it." "All right." The Sword Grandmaster's face suddenly darkened. "If you really feel guilty, Then put away your pretense and fight to the death with me on this sword observation lake. Fight to the death. When Ye Tian heard these words, his expression changed. It seemed that the hatred between the Sword Grandmaster and the Blood Demon Ancestor was so great that it could only be resolved with a fight to the death. Lord Sword Grandmaster, I understand your desire for revenge. This time, the Blood Demon Ancestor was silent for a long time before he finally said, If Lord Sword Grandmaster really can't let go of the hatred, then I am willing to bet. Bet? The Sword Grandmaster's eyes darkened. Speak clearly. How do you want to bet? Lord Sword Grandmaster, I will guard the prison. The Blood Demon Ancestor raised his head slightly and said, But Lord Sword Grandmaster can only use one sword. After that, if you are lucky enough to survive, then the grudge between you and the Sword Alliance will be written off. What do you think, Lord Sword Grandmaster? Blood Demon Ancestor, you should know the hatred that I have for you. You should also know that I will not show mercy with this sword. The Sword Grandmaster's beautiful eyes trembled slightly as he spoke in a deep voice. I understand. The Blood Demon Ancestor bowed and smiled. His eyes were extremely calm. Then do you know that my sword sex sword is even sharper in this Hang Mountain? The Sword Grandmaster narrowed his eyes again and asked in a deep voice. Nye Tian was also a little surprised, and he felt a little emotional about the Blood Demon Ancestor. The Sword Grandmaster had previously told Sky Sword Zhuzhengyi that she was invincible in Mount Heng. It was obvious that Mount Heng's special geographical location and array formation had greatly improved the Sword Grandmaster. The fact that the Blood Demon Ancestor dared to resist the Sword Grandmaster's sword showed his confidence in his own strength and his repentance. I have already seen the Mount Heng sword array. If I die in the hands of the Sword Grandmaster today, it is also my fate. I have no complaints. The Blood Demon Ancestor remained calm and bowed slightly to show his respect to the Sword Grandmaster. Even so, it would be impolite for me to refuse. The Sword Grandmaster's beautiful eyes suddenly trembled, and the sword aura around her was activated. It was invincible and seemed to want to tear everything apart. Chapter 47-26. Mount Heng, above the Sword Observation Lake. Whoosh! The sword chi around Sword Zong erupted abruptly, and a peerlessly powerful strand of sword intent erupted in the sky. The surface of the lake below seemed to have sensed it, and it actually exploded into an enormous vortex, causing enormous ripples to surge towards the surroundings. Nye Tian instantly felt the pressure from the sword intent. His eyes narrowed and he retreated thousands of meters away. Sword Grandmaster's strength in the Sword Principle had exceeded his expectations. Even though she was slightly inferior to the Sun God Sword Emperor, she was definitely not inferior to the Sword Demon Yin Fenghua. However, Nye Tian could tell that the terrain of Mount Heng and the Sword Observation Lake below had greatly improved Sword Grandmaster's sword intent. That was why Sword Grandmaster was confident that she was invincible in Mount Heng. The sword intent was like a tidal wave, stirring up a huge wave in the air. Ku Hai stood in the sword wave. His short and skinny figure looked extremely frail, but he was as steady as a mountain and as unmoving as a bell. Sword Grandmaster, even without the enhancement of the Mount Heng sword momentum, your sword intent is not inferior to the Sword Grandmaster back then, Ku Hai said faintly. Ku Hai spoke indifferently. As soon as he finished speaking, a scarlet-red sea of blood appeared behind him, and it was like a curtain that blotted out the sky, causing the heavens and the earth and the surroundings to fall into a dark red color. After the sea of blood appeared, the boundless sword wave in the air was suppressed, and the sword momentum was slightly restrained. The Blood Demon Ancestor's torrential blood sea really lives up to its name, Sword Grandmaster said. Sword Grandmaster's sword momentum surged like a mountain, and heaven and earth shook. You flatter me, Sword Grandmaster. Ku Hai's expression was calm, but he looked a little indifferent. He said loudly, Back then, the prison grandmaster used the 8th level of torrential blood sea to severely injure the sword grandmaster. The 8th level. Sword grandmaster's eyes narrowed and she said, "How many levels of torrential blood sea can you perform now?" "The 9th level." Ku Hai's eyes dimmed and a strange gleam flashed in his eyes. He said, "I had no choice but to use this move. However, the prison grandmaster was entrusted by the Prison Suppression Association, so I had to do my best. However, Sword Grandmaster, you don't have to worry. Even if you have the strength of that person back then, you can also perform the 9th level of Torrential Blood Sea." "That person?" The Sword Sect Master's expression changed slightly. "You're talking about Donghuang Jingrong?" "Exactly." Ku Hai nodded as a long look flashed across his eyes. He seemed to recall many things and said, "The prison enforcer suffered a crushing defeat in his battle with Donghuang. Just one sword strike from him was enough to make the prison master feel as if the stars were falling from the sky. That boundless pressure still makes the prison master feel a lingering fear when he thinks about it." At that time, although he didn't say a word, the warden could tell that he had come to take revenge for the old sword sect. It's just that the warden still doesn't understand why he spared the warden's life. The sword sect master's beautiful eyes trembled slightly, and it was obvious that she was moved in her heart. It turned out that during that battle, Donghuang Jingrong had actually heavily injured the blood demon ancestor with a single sword strike. Actually, Jianzong did not know much about Donghuang Jingrong. He only knew that Donghuang Jingrong had a master-disciple relationship with old Jianzong. Perhaps Donghuang Jingrong had sought out the blood demon ancestor to take revenge for the old sword ancestor. However, why did he not kill the blood demon ancestor? Donghuang is the strongest person the prison enforcer has ever seen in his life. Ku Hai seemed to recall many things, and there was a yearning look in his eyes as he said, "Throughout the 7 great prison realms, if there's anyone who can fight with Donghuang, it's probably the president. The president of the prison suppressing realm, the great prison master." The sword sect master's eyes trembled again, and she was shocked beyond words. The president of the prison suppressing realm was known as the great prison master, and he was recognized as the strongest person in the 7 great prison realms. Ku Hai actually said that only the great prison master could fight with Donghuang Jingrong in the 7 great prison realms, which showed how much he respected Donghuang Jingrong. From his words, one could vaguely feel that in his eyes, even the great prison master might not be a match for Donghuang Jingrong. "Lord Sword Sect, let's stop chatting here. Make your move." At this moment, Ku Hai raised his head slightly, and his eyes were filled with extreme determination and calmness. It was like a deep well, without any ripples. "All right." The sword sect master's eyes narrowed, and she shouted coldly. Suddenly, the sword essence around her surged to the extreme, and the surrounding mountains and the lake beneath her feet suddenly shook violently, as though they could not withstand the mighty sword chi wave and were on the verge of collapse. "Great sword essence!" Ku Hai could not help but exclaim, but there was no fear in her eyes. Instead, there was an indescribable excitement in her eyes. Ever since the battle with Donghuang Jingrong, he had not been as excited as he was now. Heng Shan's sword immortal slashed the heavens. At this moment, the sword sect shouted in a low voice. However, he didn't draw his sword, and he just tapped lightly with his finger. Instantly, the boundless sword intent in the surrounding space suddenly converged together, and it instantly condensed into a dazzling sword of sword intent. Pist. The sword essence was not grand, but its sharpness was extremely sharp. Wherever it passed, even the void was torn apart, and there was a piercing sound. Nye Tian was tens of thousands of meters away, but he could still feel the sharpness of the sword essence, and he could not help but be moved. He believed that even a 10,000 zhang tall mountain might not be able to withstand the sword essence, let alone an ordinary shield. Could Ku Hai's torrential blood sea block the sword essence? Torrential blood sea, Ninth level, 9,000 blood waves. At this moment, Ku-hai made a move. He put his palms together and retreated toward his chest. Rumble, instantly, the boundless blood sea behind him began to rumble. It was like an endless crimson snake, and it looked extremely terrifying. Bang! 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 Then, as the blood sea rumbled, the 9,000 blood waves merged together and formed 9 enormous blood wave shields. They were like a bloody great wall that stood between the heavens and the earth. Bang! In the next instant, the sword will arrived, and when it came into contact with the first blood wave shield, the shield shattered with a loud sound, turning into a wave of blood. Bang! 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 Following that, the second shield, the third shield, the eighth shield, all of them shattered. Buzz! However, when it reached the ninth shield, the sword essence suddenly paused, and a shrill sword hum was heard. Instantly, the attack weakened by 70%. Crack! Crack, crack, crack. At this moment, the ninth shield let out a crisp sound. Then, it cracked in all directions like a spider web. As the sword essence approached, Ku-hai's face turned solemn. Bang! In the end, the ninth shield was still unable to block the sword intent and suddenly shattered. Puff! The sword essence arrived and stabbed into Ku-hai's chest. However, it was like an arrow at the end of its flight, and it could not advance any further. Ku-hai's body shook, and the sword essence instantly shattered. It turned into sword aura and disappeared. Thank you, Grand Sword Master, for showing mercy. Chapter 47-27. Please show mercy. Nie Tian was taken aback by Bitter Sea's words and actions. Could it be that the Sword Grandmaster had held back in that attack? But didn't the Sword Grandmaster say that she would go all out to take revenge for the Sword Grandmaster? I already gave it my all in that attack. It's just that. The Sword Grandmaster's beautiful eyes trembled slightly. She paused for a moment and smiled bitterly. It's just that I gave up the boost that the power of Mount Heng brought me. Nie Tian's gaze suddenly froze. So that's why. No wonder when the Sword Grandmaster attacked. He felt that the power of heaven and earth around him had changed, giving him the illusion that time and space had been stripped away. Although the power of Mount Heng could not be considered the Sword Grandmaster's own power, it was still a power that she could use. But she was very magnanimous in giving up this power. Otherwise, even if Ku-hai had the 9th level of the torrential blood sea, he would not have been able to block that attack. The Sword Grandmaster is benevolent and righteous. The Sword Grandmaster indeed did not choose the wrong person. Ku-hai bowed towards the Sword Grandmaster once again and sighed in admiration. Since you've given up the identity of the Blood Demon Ancestor, then be a diligent warden. The Sword Grandmaster's eyes dimmed, and she could not hide the regret in her eyes. The reason why she had held back earlier was not because she did not want to kill Ku-hai, but because she could tell that Ku-hai was no longer the Blood Demon Ancestor of the past. If the Sword Grandmaster was still here, he would probably agree with what she was doing. Since the Warden has chosen this path, he will definitely not be afraid of difficulties and will go all the way. Ku-hai smiled. He could finally put down the burden that had been pressing on his heart for a long time. But in the next moment, he locked his gaze on Nie Tian. After staring at him for a long time, he said, Sword Grandmaster, Nie Tian is the person chosen by the Prison Suppression Guild. The Warden must take him away. You still refuse to give up, right? The Sword Grandmaster seemed to have expected this and could not help but smile. The Warden has been entrusted by the Prison Suppression Guild. I have no choice but to do so, Ku-hai said with a bitter expression. Jian Zong smiled once more, and then her pretty face turned ghastly cold. What if I don't allow you to bring anyone? Ku-hai had managed to keep his life after that attack. If he still didn't know what was good for him, then he shouldn't blame her for being merciless. Lord Sword Master, the Heaven Pillar project is related to the stability of the 7 prison realms. The Warden begs you to let the Warden take Nie Tian away. Unexpectedly, Misery did not put on a tough front. Instead, he became even more humble and spoke sincerely. Lord Sword Sect, Nye Tian thought for a moment, and he was just about to speak when he was interrupted by someone from Sword Sect who turned around abruptly. This is Mount Hung. Since this Sword Sect has said that we'll protect you, then how can we allow you to be taken away so easily? Sword Grandmaster's beautiful eyes moved about, but there was an extremely deep and ghastly look in them. This time, she released her true killing intent. Lord Sword Sect, is there really no room for discussion? Misery frowned. He did not expect Sword Grandmaster to be so tough. In his opinion, Sword Grandmaster did not have much to do with Nye Tian, so why should they offend the Prison Suppression Guild for the latter? One must know that the Prison Suppression Guild was the strongest force in the 7 prison realms. The 9 Lake Sword Alliance was a top force in the prison realm, but there were many forces that were stronger than the Sword Alliance in the 7 prison realms. With such a difference in strength, it was as easy as snapping a finger for the Prison Suppression Guild to destroy the 9 Lake Sword Alliance. Was it really worth it to bet the entire Sword Alliance for someone who was almost unrelated to them? I know what you're thinking. The Prison Suppression Guild is indeed an enemy that the Sword Alliance can't afford to offend, but do you really dare to attack the Sword Alliance just for a Heaven Pillar candidate? How could Sword Grandmaster not see through Misery's thoughts? She said with her beautiful eyes gloomy, the Prison Suppression Guild is known as the #1 force in the 7 realms. Although it looks like it's for the stability of the 7 realms, it's actually suppressing the 7 realms. If the Prison Suppression Guild were to take out their anger on the Sword Alliance because of such a small matter, how would they face the criticism of the 7 realms? Although the Prison Suppression Guild is strong, it's unwise to provoke the public and cause the 7 realms to rebel. The calm voice fell into Misery's ears, but it made him fall into deep thought. Although he had not joined the Prison Suppression Guild for long, he had a deep understanding of the Prison Suppression Guild's history. He had studied the Prison Suppression Guild's history in detail, so he knew that during the long reign of the Prison Suppression Guild, they had been attacked by the 7 prison realms twice, and one of them was even almost destroyed. Although what Sword Grandmaster said was a threat, it was not without reason. If they were to attack the 9 Lake Alliance because of such a small matter, it would indeed arouse the dissatisfaction of the other forces in the 7 realms. However, if the protests were too loud, it might really cause chaos in the 7 realms. However, Nye Tian was crucial to the entire Heaven Pillar plan, so he must be taken away. As a result, they were in a dilemma. The Heaven Pillar plan has been prepared for a long time, and the candidates for the 12 pillars have already been decided. Why is the Prison Suppression Guild so obsessed with Nye Tian now? Sword Grandmaster could tell that Misery seemed to be hiding something, so she asked in a deep voice. In her opinion, Nye Tian was extremely talented and powerful, and was indeed the best candidate for the Heaven Pillar plan. However, the Heaven Pillar plan had been prepared for a long time, and the candidates for the 12 pillars had already been decided. It was not that Nye Tian was the only candidate. Furthermore, Nye Tian's appearance was very sudden, so how did he become so important? Unless the Prison Suppression Guild had other plans for Nye Tian, and wanted him to play an irreplaceable role in the Heaven Pillar plan. In that case, Nye Tian would be in even more danger. Lord Sword Grandmaster, since you've already said it, I won't hide it anymore. Misery suddenly raised his head. His eyes were cloudy, but there was a hint of determination in them as he said, Nye Tian entered the Heaven Pillar not as one of the 12 pillars, but as a mystery seeker. Mystery seeker? Sword Grandmaster frowned in confusion. As expected, the Prison Suppression Guild was so obsessed with Nye Tian because they had other plans. Yes. Misery nodded and glanced at Nye Tian. In fact, the Prison Suppression Guild arranged for a mystery seeker because of the Prison Suppression Guild's suggestion. Back then, when the Prison Grandmaster fought with Dong Huang, he was deeply impressed by his strength. Later on, the prison grandmaster found out that Dong Wang had participated in the previous Heaven Pillar plan, and he was the only person to survive. Therefore, the prison grandmaster guessed that Dong Wang was so powerful because he had seen the pillars before. Perhaps the secrets of the 7 prison realms are on the pillars, and Dong Wang's strength is most likely from the pillars. Therefore, you let Nye Tian participate in the Heaven Pillar plan in order to uncover the secrets of the pillars? Before Misery could finish, Sword Grandmaster's face darkened as he asked in a low voice. Yes. Chapter 47-28. Ku Hai's words were calm, but they contained a sense of righteousness. Prison Master Ku Hai, you should know that Dong Wang is the only person who survived the Heaven Pillar mission. The Sword Grandmaster's eyes flickered. She pondered for a moment before she continued. Let's not talk about whether his power is related to the Heaven Pillar. Even if it's true, so what? The journey to the Heaven Pillar is extremely dangerous. To put it bluntly, it's a suicide mission. Is the Prison Suppression Guild trying to send a young man to his death just because you're putting on an act? Ku Hai's expression was slightly awkward. He fell silent for a moment before he said, Lord Sword Grandmaster, you might not know Nye Tian better than the Prison Suppression Guild. In fact, he's not from the 7 realms. He's from the All-Heaven Sacred World. Nye Tian and the Sword Grandmaster were both shocked when they heard the words All-Heaven Sacred World. The Prison Suppression Guild actually knew that Nye Tian was from the All-Heaven Sacred World. Nye Tian had clearly just arrived in the Prison Suppression Guild, so how did they know his identity? The Prison Suppression Guild is far more powerful than you've imagined. Ku Hai could naturally see the shock on Nye Tian and the Sword Grandmaster's faces. He smiled and said, actually, the moment Nye Tian arrived in the Prison Suppression Guild, his whereabouts were already in the Prison Suppression Guild's grasp. The prison enforcers came here not because of Bai Zichio's notice, but because the Prison Suppression Guild chose Nye Tian. Nye Tian furrowed his brows and took a deep breath to calm himself down. He looked at Ku Hai and said, Senior Ku Hai, if the Prison Suppression Guild knows that I'm from the All-Heaven Sacred World, why did they make me the explorer of the 7 realms? This, Ku Hai's expression stiffened and he was momentarily speechless. He did not expect Nye Tian to ask such a question. Lord Nye Tian, the truth is that the Prison Suppression Club has learned a lot more than you can imagine. Ku Hai paused for a moment before he regained his composure and said, We know that you have an unusual relationship with Dong Wang Jingrong, and we also know that you came to the 7 realms to find him. What else? Nye Tian was surprised, but he did not show it on his face. Instead, he asked calmly. He. Ku Hai could naturally tell that Nye Tian was testing him, but he did not hide anything. He said, Dong Wang is also from the All-Heavens, but the way he came to the 7 realms was different from yours. Therefore, the Prison Suppression Guild took a long time to figure out his identity. Dong Wang probably came to the 7 realms for the sake of the stability of the sacred world. We can only guess that the All-Heaven Sacred World has encountered a similar problem as the 7 realms. Nye Tian was even more surprised in his heart, but he couldn't show it. Instead, he smiled and said, The Prison Suppression Guild truly lives up to its name of prison suppression. You really know the 7 realms like the back of your hand. The Hell Suppressing Guild controls the 7 hells. If they don't even understand outsiders, wouldn't they be too useless? Misery smiled before turning serious again. He looked at Nye Tian and said, Young Master Nye Tian, the prison enforcers represent the Prison Suppression Guild, which is also the 7 hells. We don't care what motives you and Dong Wang have, as long as it doesn't endanger the 7 hells, the Prison Suppression Guild will help. The prerequisite is that I go to the Heavenly Pillar and find out the secret of the Heavenly Pillar, right? Before Misery could finish, Nye Tian interrupted. Yes. Ku Hai nodded and said, The Wardens don't know much about the All-Heaven Saint Realm, but if someone like Dong Wang came to the prison realm to seek help, It means that the All-Heaven Saint realm is in great danger. Misery, Nye Tian won't go to the heavenly pillar. Don't waste your breath. Before Nye Tian could speak, Sword Master spoke again coldly. Nye Tian frowned and looked at Sword Master without saying a word. Watch out. Misery's expression turned ugly. After a moment of silence, he looked at Sword Master and seemed to sense something. His expression changed and he screamed, "PFFF! PFFF!" Before he could finish his sentence, two faint air-piercing sounds came from the void, as if a piece of paper was being torn. Nye Tian's eyes flickered violently as he saw the two sharp white blades shooting directly towards the sword sect master like arrows that had just been shot from a bow. The two white blades seemed ordinary, but they contained an extremely terrifying power. Wherever they passed, the void was torn apart. It was a moment of life and death. Sword Master moved slightly and a majestic sword essence shot into the sky from the sword observation lake. It turned into thousands of waves and blocked in front of her like a wall. PFFF! PFFF! In the next instant, the white blades fell into the sword wave. Although they were unobstructed, their speed was greatly reduced. Sword Master quickly retreated and moved to the side. PFFF! PFFF! Then, the white blades tore through the waves and flashed past. Sword Master's figure shuddered in the air before she stabilized herself. As she stabilized herself, Misery C and Nye Tian finally saw a faint bloody mark on her cheek and a bloody hole on her right shoulder. Blood was flowing out slowly, dyeing half of her body red. Master Sword Master! Nye Tian's expression flickered as he shouted. I'm fine. Sword Master endured the pain and tried to seal the wound on her shoulder with his sword intent, but he realized that the wound could not be sealed. The white blades were extremely terrifying, as if they contained a terrifying burning force. Even with Sword Master's strength, it was difficult for her to resist. Since you're here, why don't you show yourselves? At that instant, Misery C's eyes darkened. The force of the blood ocean around him surged and shrouded the area as if it was going to shroud the entire place. As soon as he finished speaking, two black-robed figures walked out from the rift. The two figures were a man and a woman of average build. They looked very ordinary. However, Nye Tian noticed that the two of them were wreathed in an almost transparent shield, which seemed to be able to ward off the power of the Blood Sea. Sword Master of the Nine Lakes Sword Alliance, you live up to your reputation. You managed to survive our joint attack. The woman's eyes trembled as she looked at Sword Master from afar and said. Sword Master's face darkened and beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. She did not speak. Just now, although she was lucky enough to escape with her life, she was also severely injured. Moreover, if not for Misery C's timely reminder and the powerful sword intent in the sword observation lake, she would have been a corpse. On the Heng Mountain Sword Observatory Lake, these two people almost took her life. Their identities were definitely not simple. The Blood Demon ancestor in the past and the prison master Misery C are both worthy of their names. Then the man also spoke. He smiled faintly, and there seemed to be a strange light surging in his eyes. You're flattering me. Misery C's eyes darkened. He lifted his head slightly and said, If the prison master is not mistaken, you're the master of 100 shadows and 1,000 machines of the 100 shadows and 1,000 machines, right? Master of 100 shadows, 1,000 machines. Nye Tian's expression changed when he heard the two names. He was dumbfounded. He did not expect the two people before him to be the legendary master of 100 shadows and 1,000 machines. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 47-29. 100 shadows, 1,000 machines, master of 100 shadows, supreme machine. Even Nye Tian's expression changed. The shock on his face was beyond words. Not long ago, he had heard from Baizichio that the 100 Shadows 1,000 Machines was one of the strongest dark forces in the Purgatory world. Its overall strength was not weaker than the 4 great forces. Apart from the 3 souls, 5 pardons, 7 evils and 9 peaks, The true controllers of the 100 Shadows and 1,000 Machines were the 100 Shadows Master and 1,000 Machines. Who would have thought that the legendary 100 Shadows Master and Qianji Zun would appear at the same time and visit the Nine Lakes Sword Alliance? Misery Ocean Convict, since you know who we are, please retreat. Supremacy Qianji was the man. He looked at Misery with a hint of indifference in his eyes as he spoke in a deep voice. His tone was indifferent, but it was overbearing. Master of 100 Shadows, Paragon of 1,000 Machines, you are both grandmasters of your generation, but you work together to ambush His Excellency Sword Sect. Misery looked at the both of them and said coldly. Venerable 1,000 Secrets smiled and said, what we do is to kill people. Style and whatnot has nothing to do with us. You two, the 100 Shadows and 1,000 Machines, have a bad reputation in the Punisher world. The Prison Suppression Guild has long wanted to make a move against you. Ku Hai stared at the two of them as his lips curled into a cold smile. He said in a deep voice, today, I will represent the Prison Suppressing Guild to challenge you two. Misery Sea Convict, we didn't come here for the Sword Sect, nor for you. We came here for Nietian. The 100 Shadows Master smiled coquettishly and said, why are you two getting involved in this for a little kid? So you're here for Nietian. In that case, the warden can't just sit back and watch. Ku Hai's eyes suddenly sank and his expression turned much colder. He'd originally thought that Master of 100 Shadows and Exalt of 1,000 Secrets had arrived at the same time for the sake of the Sword Sect, yet he'd never imagined that it would actually be for the sake of Nietian. Misery, you were injured by Donghuang Jingrong in the past, and Nietian has an extraordinary relationship with Donghuang Jingrong. Are you sure you want to go against us for him? The corner of Venerable 1,000 Fate's mouth twitched as he said coldly. Since the two of you have come, you will not return empty-handed. Misery didn't want to waste his breath and said indifferently, since that's the case, then make your move. Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, his body shook. Instantly, a sea of blood rose behind him. Angry waves rolled and rolled, threatening to engulf the heaven and earth. Nietian and the Sword Sect couldn't help but exclaim with surprise when they saw this scene. At this moment, the aura of the embittered sea was even more terrifying than before. Could it be that Misery held back during the battle with the Sword Sect earlier? The Blood Demon Ancestors' torrential blood sea. Today, the two of us will experience it for ourselves. Seeing this, Senior 1,000 Machines fiercely stomped on the ground. The aura around him was wild, and he forcefully broke through the pressure of the blood sea. However, his complexion did not look good. The pressure of the blood sea of Misery was much stronger than he had expected. This is the 10th level's torrential blood ocean. The Sword Sect retreated to the distance, and he was extremely shocked as he gazed at the ocean of blood that covered the sky. At this moment, the embittered sea's torrential blood ocean was several times stronger than the 9th level. It was clearly the 10th level's torrential blood ocean. She had never thought that the embittered sea would be able to use the 10th level's torrential blood ocean. If the embittered sea had used the 10th level's torrential blood ocean in the previous battle, she would not be able to resist it even if she used the force of a mountain. It seemed that the embittered sea's strength had skyrocketed after joining the Prison Suppression Guild. This person's aura is so powerful that it's rare even in the all-heavens sacred world. Nietian was also shocked by the embittered sea's aura and thought to himself. In the sky, the embittered sea faced the two alone. His aura was shocking. Blood Demon Ancestor, I didn't think your torrential blood ocean would be so terrifying. Senior 1,000 Machines' eyes darkened. He could sense that the surrounding space was filled with an extremely terrifying murderous aura, which made him feel extremely fearful. Today, the Prison Suppression Guild will enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. You won't be able to leave this place alive. The embittered sea's eyes narrowed. He suddenly shuddered, and his hunched body straightened. Immediately, the torrential blood ocean in the air became even more violent. Boom, boom, boom. The endless waves of the blood ocean were like fiery serpents. They swept through the sky as they surged towards the Master of 100 Shadows and Senior 1,000 Machines. Break! However, the two of them were not to be trifled with. After glancing at one another, they bellowed out at the same time. A blinding white light shot out, piercing through the waves of blood as it charged towards the embittered sea. Watch out! Although the sword sect was far away, she was able to see everything clearly. She could not help but cry out when she saw this. She had already lost the ability to fight. She could only rely on the embittered sea to protect Nietion from the Master of 100 Shadows and Senior 1,000 Machines. Spurt! The embittered sea's eyes suddenly darkened. He dodged to the side, but he still failed to dodge the attack. A faint cut appeared on his face. As expected of the two supremacies of the 100 Shadows and Senior 1,000 Machines. You're still able to fight back against the Prison Suppression Guild's 10th layer, the torrential blood ocean. The embittered sea let out a roar. His aura surged violently as the waves of the blood ocean gathered in the sky. In the blink of an eye, they transformed into crimson runes that shrouded his entire body as if he was wearing a layer of blood ocean armor. This person's strength has exceeded my expectations. Be careful. Senior 1,000 Machines said with a cold expression. He was glad that he had come with the Master of 100 Shadows instead of coming alone. If he was alone, he would not be a match for the embittered sea. Die! The Master of 100 Shadows nodded and let out a roar. She moved and turned into a white ray of lightning. She charged at the embittered sea with the power of lightning. You're courting death. The embittered sea let out a cold laugh, as if he had returned to being the blood demon ancestor who killed without batting an eyelid. Die! He let out a roar and slammed his palm down. The waves of the blood ocean gathered into a crimson dragon with a monstrous aura as if it was going to break through the shackles of the heavens and earth. Watch out! In an instant, Senior 1,000 Machines felt a terrifying pressure and immediately screamed. Unfortunately, it was too late. Bang! In the next instant, a deep sound of collision was heard in the void. Suddenly, the blood-red dragon froze in the air, and then its entire body exploded. At the same time, a white ray shot out from the sea of blood. It was the Master of 100 Shadows. 100 Shadows! Venerable Qianji's figure moved and caught the 100 Shadows Lord. Qianji, The Master of 100 Shadows stabilized herself. She had just opened her mouth when she spat out a mouthful of blood, and her face turned as pale as a sheet. She initially thought that she would be able to injure the embittered sea severely even if she could not kill the embittered sea. Unfortunately, she was severely injured by the power of the blood ocean before she could even touch the embittered sea. Leave! Senior 1,000 Machines glared at the embittered sea coldly. The murderous intent in his eyes was so intense that it almost materialized. However, he held it in and made up his mind to leave. Can you leave? Chapter 47:30. In the sky above the Sword Temple Lake, it was a battle of life and death. Damn it! Venerable Qianji roared furiously as he looked at the blood sea prison around him. His eyes were bloodshot. The two of you, the prison enforcer, has already activated the 10th level of the monstrous blood sea. He has already made up his mind to keep the two of you here. Misery Sea stepped on a towering wave of blood and suppressed the 100 Shadows Lord and Supremacy 1,000 Fate with a monstrous aura. Blood Demon Ancestor, there is no grudge between us. Do you really want to do this? Venerable Qianji's eyes were filled with a strange color. Strange crimson runes floated around his body, and he was able to withstand the pressure of the blood sea. He had never thought that his greatest opponent in Mount Heng would not be the Sword Sect, but the blood demon ancestor who used to make people tremble in fear. The prison enforcer has joined the Prison Suppression Guild. There is no longer a blood demon ancestor in this world. Ku Hai shouted. Today, the prison enforcer will enforce justice on behalf of heaven and destroy the 100 Shadows Lord. Arrogant, exalted Qianji roared, and his eyes turned a strange blood-red color. Immediately, crimson runes surged around his body, and ear-piercing wails rang out in the void, as if there were tens of thousands of living beings suffering. 10,000 spirits sacrifice. Ku Hai's eyes darkened and he said coldly, "Rumor has it that Venerable Qian Ji used the 10,000 spirits sacrifice to cultivate a forbidden technique. I didn't expect it to be true. Blood demon ancestor, forcing me to use the 10,000 spirits sacrifice is your biggest mistake." Venerable Qian Ji was close to going crazy. He roared and crimson runes revolved around his body, forming a long red spear in the void. It was a liquid as if it was made of blood. The 10,000 spirits sacrifice used the lives of tens of thousands of living beings as the price. It extracted their blood and souls and used a strange technique to refine them into forbidden runes. The long red spear in Venerable Qianji's hand was condensed from the blood and souls of tens of thousands of living beings. It contained a terrifying forbidden power. "Evil demon, today is the day you die." Misery stared at the scarlet spear. He could clearly sense the bloody aura that surged towards him, as well as the trembling of his soul. He immediately roared angrily. Boom! The next moment, he took a step forward and the blood sea around him surged. The blood sea turned into waves and charged towards Venerable Qianji. Bang! 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 Senior Qianji waved the spear in his hand and destroyed the endless waves of blood with an unstoppable force. The 10th level's torrential blood wave is only SOSO. Senior Qianji pointed his spear at the sky with an imposing aura. The aura around him was so strong that it seemed to be able to shake the heavens. 100 shadows, 1,000 machines, revered 1,000 machines, you really live up to your reputation. In the distant sky, the sword sex's beautiful eyes trembled, and it was difficult for her to conceal the shock in her heart. The 10th level of the bitter sea, the monstrous sea of blood, made her feel even more pressured. But for Qianji Zun to still have such power in the blood waves, it was really beyond her expectations. The reason why Venerable 1,000 machines could break through the blood wave was because of the spear in his hand. Nie Tian saw the crux of the matter and said solemnly, "The taboo power in the spear is extremely effective against the power of the blood sea. However, the taboo power within the spear can't last for too long. If Senior 1,000 machines can't finish the battle in a short time, he will have to bear a grudge." Yes. After hearing Nie Tian's words, Grandmaster Sword also saw the clues and nodded slightly. "Blood demon ancestor, I'll show you the true power of the 1,000 spirits spear today." At that moment, Senior Qianji roared and pointed his spear in the air. Instantly, a crimson ray of light pierced through the air and attacked Misery with a fierce aura. Almost at the same time, Misery suddenly felt his soul tremble and an inexplicable miserable howl rang in his mind. In fact, there was even a horrifying scene in his mind. It was actually him being pierced by countless chains and enduring extreme torture. In an instant, his soul was under attack and Misery was slightly dazed. "Die!" Senior Qianji grasped the opportunity and roared. His figure was like lightning as his spear drew a bloody light in the air and dove straight toward Misery. "Watch out!" The shocking scene caused Grandmaster Sword's beautiful eyes to tremble and she could not help but exclaim. Senior Qianji had used all his strength in this attack. If Misery could not dodge it, he would definitely die. Oh no! Nie Tian was similarly shocked by the scene before him, and his heart trembled as he exclaimed. At that crucial moment, something strange happened again. Boom! Just as the spear was about to land, a wall of blood suddenly rose in front of Misery and blocked Senior Qianji's fatal attack. How is this possible? Senior Qianji suddenly felt that his spear was blocked and could not move forward anymore. He could not help but exclaim in shock. It's not easy for you to do this in the middle of the sea of blood. At that moment, Misery's divine sense regained clarity. His eyes were filled with murderous intent as he spoke in a deep voice. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly slapped with his palm. The force of the raging waves exploded and swept everything. Bang bang bang! Senior Qianji's figure retreated in the raging waves as waves of blood exploded around him. Even the 1,000-spirit spear in his hand could not hold on any longer and was showing signs of collapsing. Qianji, Master of 100 Shadows, exclaimed. His figure turned into a bolt of lightning and caught Senior Qianji. Master of 100 Shadows, I. Senior Qianji steadied himself and looked at Master of 100 Shadows beside him. He was about to speak when he spurted out a mouthful of blood. Don't speak. I'll take you away. Master of 100 Shadows' eyes trembled. He ignored his injuries and forcefully unleashed a powerful aura to push away the raging waves of the sea of blood around him. The affection between the two of you is touching. Misery's expression changed slightly when he saw that. He said, but since the prison warden has made up his mind to kill you today, he will not let you go. Blood demon ancestor, do you really think you can kill us? Master of 100 Shadows shouted in a low voice. Then, his aura exploded and his long hair fluttered in the wind. Master of 100 Shadows, no. Senior Qianji looked at Master of 100 Shadows and immediately reacted. His expression changed and he shouted. He wanted to stop her, but he did not have the strength to do so. She wants a life-and-death struggle. Nie Tian's eyes suddenly darkened and he said in a low voice. It was obvious that Master of 100 Shadows wanted to sacrifice herself in exchange for Senior Qianji's chance of survival. Limit of 100 Shadows, heavenly explosion of Mara. At that moment, the 100 Shadows Master let out a loud cry. Blood chi surged around his body as a terrifying force shot into the sky, as if it was defying the natural order. Boom! In the next second, before Misery could react, the cage of the sea of blood was broken and the sea of blood collapsed. What a powerful force! Misery's eyes narrowed and he could not hide the shock in his heart. He did not expect Master of 100 Shadows to be able to unleash such a powerful force after being severely injured. 100 Shadows. Senior Qianji's heart ached when he saw this and he wailed. Leave now. Don't let my sacrifice be in vain. Master of 100 Shadows stared deeply at Senior Qianji. It was the last time. Bang! As soon as he finished speaking, Master of 100 Shadows' body shook and turned into a sea of blood in the air. It was tragic and spectacular. Chapter 47:31. High up in the sky, the blood waves surged and the last bit of heat was spilled. A long time later, the sea of blood dispersed and the sky became clear again. However, there was still a strong smell of blood in the air. Master Sword and Nie Tian looked solemn and did not say a word for a long time. No matter how Master of 100 Shadows and Lord of 1,000 Secrets were, the relationship between them was extremely deep and sincere. Especially the scene where Master of 100 Shadows self-destructed to save Lord of 1,000 Secrets. It was touching. Senior Misery. At this moment, Nie Tian saw that Bitter Sea's body was swaying, as if he couldn't stand still. Nie Tian let out a cry of surprise and rushed over to support him. My time's up. Misery looked at Nie Tian. His eyes that were once filled with killing intent were now filled with kindness. This. Nie Tian sensed Misery's aura was rapidly weakening. He suddenly thought of something and said in shock, could the price of the 10th level of torrential blood ocean be? Don't move, I'll help him. At this moment, Master Sword arrived and was ready to save Misery. Master Sword, there's no need. However, Misery smiled and held his body up. He said, with my abilities, I shouldn't have been able to use the 10th level of torrential blood ocean. I merely used a forbidden technique to forcefully break through my limit. From the moment I did that, I was already prepared for the worst. Why did you do that? Master Sword's eyes trembled, and he could not hide the sadness in his heart. Initially, Master of Hundred Shadows could have left directly with Misery's abilities. Moreover, Master of Hundred Shadows and Lord of Thousand Secrets had said that as long as Misery did not interfere, they would not make things difficult for him. However, Misery had risked his life to fight Master of Hundred Shadows and Lord of Thousand Secrets alone. My life has been ridiculous. Misery smiled again and said, in the first half of my life I've killed countless people. By the time I truly understood the truth of the world, it was already too late for regret. Ever since I became Misery, there wasn't a day that I didn't regret my killing. Today, to be able to leave this world in such a way is already the greatest blessing the heavens have bestowed upon me. As he spoke, he turned to look at Nye Tian. He seemed to have used the last of his strength to force out a smile and said, Nye Tian, you're very good. I won't force you regarding the heavenly pillar anymore. If you want to go, then go. If you don't want to go, then don't. Nye Tian's eyes trembled and he didn't know what to say. He could sense the peacefulness of the dying old man in front of him. Take this token and help me return it to the great Hell Venerate. Thank him for giving me a second chance to choose. A token appeared in Misery's hand as he handed it over to Nye Tian in a trembling voice. I will. Nye Tian took the token and felt that it was extremely heavy. This was Misery's final request. He couldn't break his promise. Nye Tian, the 12 heavenly pillars are not only related to the survival of the 7 prison realms, but they might also be related to your world. The prison master hopes that you. Misery's eyes were a little cloudy and moist. His voice was no longer trembling, and it was obvious that he had used the last bit of his strength. I'll go. Before Misery could finish speaking, Nye Tian's eyes narrowed and he said directly, Okay. Misery's expression changed and a teardrop flowed down from the corner of his eye. After saying okay 3 times, his last bit of aura finally disappeared. Nye Tian let out a long breath and a ball of flame surged in his palm. It instantly incinerated Misery's body and turned it into a puff of smoke. The blood demon ancestor, the prison master, Misery, the killing, the sin, the regret, and the sorrow. Everything had come to an end. Nye Tian, have you made up your mind? The Sword Grandmaster also let out a long breath and looked deeply at Nye Tian. Even though Misery had died to save Nye Tian, in her opinion, there was still no need for Nye Tian to participate in the Heavenly Pillars plan. How can I break my promise to the dead? Nye Tian took a deep breath and said with the corners of his mouth twitching. Since he had already promised Misery, he would naturally keep his promise. Since you've made up your mind, I won't interfere anymore. The Sword Grandmaster knew that he could not persuade Nye Tian, so he could only sigh and said, Wait here. I'll get someone to bring Bai Ziqiu here. Thank you, Sword Grandmaster. Nye Tian bowed and thanked him. Come with me. At this moment, the Sword Grandmaster stared at Nye Tian for a long time and seemed to have made a decision. As she spoke, her figure flashed and leaped into the sword visualization lake. Nye Tian was confused as he did not know what the Sword Grandmaster was going to do. However, he did not hesitate and followed her. What a powerful sword intent aura! As soon as he entered the sword observation lake, Nye Tian was shocked when he sensed the powerful sword intent aura in the lake. After the death of the Sword Alliance's powerful sword masters, their bodies would turn into sword intent and sink into the sword observation lake. The Sword Grandmaster smiled and said, Therefore, the entire sword observation lake is filled with powerful sword intent. That's why the sword observation lake has become the most sacred cultivation place in the Sword Alliance. I see. Nye Tian smiled and nodded. It seemed that not everyone could enter the sword observation lake. That must be the reason why the Sword Grandmaster hesitated earlier. I've been cultivating in the sword observation lake for a long time, and I thought I'm familiar with the environment inside and outside the lake. I can also borrow the force of heaven and earth to increase my strength. The Sword Grandmaster looked around and could not help but sigh. I didn't expect to be defeated by the 100 Shadows Qianji. If it wasn't for misery, I might have died here. Don't worry about it, Sword Grandmaster. The 100 Shadows Qianji is a martial Dao Grandmaster, and he's been killing people for a living. Nie Tian glanced at the Sword Grandmaster and said, I'm afraid you're the only one in the entire prison who can stop their sneak attack. I originally thought that the so-called 8 Grandmasters were only SOSO. The Sword Grandmaster smiled bitterly and said, but after seeing misery, I finally understood how terrifying a martial Grandmaster is. Compared to Senior Misery and the others, Sword Grandmaster is still very young. Your path in the martial Dao will be even more glorious. Nie Tian saw the Sword Grandmaster's disappointment and said indifferently. Actually, he could tell that even under the influence of the Sword Observation Lake, the Sword Grandmaster's strength was still inferior to Misery. However, Misery was considered a senior of the Sword Grandmaster, so it was not surprising that they were stronger than the Sword Grandmaster. As for the other martial Grandmasters, they might not be stronger than the Sword Grandmaster. Thank you for your consolation. I feel much better now. The Sword Grandmaster smiled and looked at Nie Tian with a gentle and charming gaze. Lord Sword Grandmaster, where are we going? Nie Tian followed the Sword Grandmaster and soon arrived at the bottom of the lake. He could feel the sword essence aura around him getting stronger, and it even pressured him slightly. He could not help but ask, I'll bring you to see what Dong Wang Jingrong left for you. The Sword Grandmaster's lips curled up and he smiled faintly. What Senior Dong Wang left for me? Nie Tian was stunned and shocked when he heard the Sword Grandmaster's words. Chapter 47-32. In the Sword Observation Lake, Nie Tian was shocked. Why would Dong Wang Jinrong leave something for him at the Sword Observation Lake? Could it be that Dong Wang Jinrong was a prophet and knew that he would come to the penal realm? Did he even know that he would come to the Sword Observation Lake? It's here. Just as Nie Tian was feeling bewildered, Jian Zong stopped and looked at a cave not far away. Then let's go in. Nie Tian calmed down and said indifferently. However, Jian Zong did not move and said, There's a restriction in this cave that Dong Wang Jinrong left behind. No one can enter. Then I'll go in myself. With a slight frown on his face, Nie Tian strode towards the cave. He was a little worried that Jian Zong did not want him to go to the heavenly pillar and wanted to trap him in the cave. Although he was worried, he couldn't hold back his curiosity and wanted to enter the cave. What dense astral energy! When Nie Tian approached the cave, he immediately felt an intense aura of astral energy and rejoiced. It looked like Jian Zong didn't lie to him. Dong Wang Jinrong had indeed set up a restriction here. Soon, he arrived at the entrance of the cave. Before he even entered, he could already feel the astral energy surging over. However, the aura of the astral energy he felt was somewhat different from the astral energy in his body. It was very strange. After entering the cave, Nie Tian could clearly feel the astral energy enveloping him, which gave him an indescribable feeling of comfort. Following the cave, they soon arrived at a spacious karst cave. The cave was as smooth as a mirror and emitted a dazzling light under the contrast of the sword intent and astral energy. Is this the thing? Nie Tian immediately saw a blazing white whirlpool above a boulder in the center of the cave that was constantly releasing dense astral energy. Without a doubt, all the astral energy in the cave came from this blazing white whirlpool. He took a deep breath and slowly approached the blazing white whirlpool to sense the aura within. This astral energy is extremely pure, but why does it seem to contain another type of energy? Nie Tian looked at the blazing white vortex with a puzzled expression. He could feel that the blazing white whirlpool was filled with an enormous amount of star power, but at the same time, it contained another type of power. The power of the stars was extremely pure, and it was very difficult to fuse with other powers. He didn't know what method Dong Huang Jingrong used to fuse the two powers together so perfectly. Who? After a short while, Nie Tian let out a long breath of turbid air, and then slowly stretched out his hand towards the blazing white vortex. Pooh! Right at this moment, the blazing white vortex seemed to have sensed something, and it actually shook in midair before transforming into dazzling rainbow-colored talisman markings. Nie Tian frowned and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. In the next moment, an even stranger scene appeared. Countless rainbow-colored runes seemed to have sensed something as they continuously converged towards Nie Tian's wrist. Ouch! Nie Tian instantly felt a piercing pain, and he couldn't help but look at his wrist. He actually saw that the talisman markings had transformed into a brand that was imprinted on his wrist. The brand was like a tattoo, and it was completed in the blink of an eye. This seems to be some sort of brand? Nie Tian couldn't help muttering as he looked at the brand on his wrist, and felt a slight burning pain. The brand was circular in shape, and the markings were extremely fine and dense. However, it was also extremely orderly. It was complicated but not chaotic. Nie Tian stared at it for a long time, but he couldn't see what it was. In the end, he could only give up. After checking the cave one last time and confirming that there was nothing else, Nie Tian left. Nie Tian, did you get it? Jian Zong immediately walked over and asked excitedly when he saw Nie Tian come out. Nie Tian nodded as he held out the brand on his wrist and said, "This brand contains a very strong power, but I don't know what it does." Jian Zong stared at the brand for a long time before he said, "Perhaps this brand is used to sense something." "Why?" Nie Tian frowned and couldn't help but ask. Even he couldn't see the use of the brand, so how could Jian Zong guess that it was a sensing brand? "When I saw this brand, I had a feeling that Dong Huang Jingrong was standing beside me." Jian Zong hesitated, but he still replied, "So that's the case." Nie Tian was even more certain that Jian Zong had an extraordinary relationship with Dong Huang Jingrong when he looked at Jian Zong. Although he was Dong Huang Jingrong's successor, he had never come into contact with the latter. On the other hand, Jian Zong should have been with Dong Huang Jingrong for a long time, so it wasn't strange that Jian Zong had a better understanding of the latter. Since Dong Huang Jingrong left this brand, he must have his reasons. "Perhaps you'll understand everything when you see him." Jian Zong smiled and left the sword observation lake with Nie Tian. After leaving the sword observation lake, Jian Zong asked someone to bring Nie Tian to the Surging Wave Peak. The Surging Wave Peak was one of the many sword peaks in the Nine Lakes Sword Alliance, and its owner was Wu Songlong, one of the 9 great grandmasters. Nie Tian arrived at the square outside the Surging Wave Peak and waited quietly. "Ha ha, you must be Nie Tian, right?" After a while, a hearty laugh sounded, and then a burly figure stepped through the air and arrived beside Nie Tian in the blink of an eye. "That's me." Nie Tian felt that the person had a powerful aura and a sword aura around him, so he bowed slightly. "I'm Wu Songlong. Zichio has told me about you." Wu Songlong laughed and said, "You're indeed a peerless talent," as he said. "Senior, you flatter me." Nie Tian was happy to see that Wu Songlong was so forthright. He smiled and asked, "Is Bai Zichio here?" Of course, he knew that Wu Songlong was Bai Zichio's adoptive father. "He went to pick someone up and will be back soon." Wu Songlong laughed and stared at Nie Tian with his small eyes. He said, "Nie Tian, I see that your sword intent is very strong. Why don't we have a spar?" "Senior, you must be joking." Nie Tian was stunned at first, but he quickly said, "I'm no match for you." As one of the 9 great grandmasters, Wu Songlong's sword cultivation was naturally very strong. Although he was not as good as Jian Zong and Heavenly Sword Zhu Jing, he was not much weaker. With Nie Tian's current strength, it was still too difficult for him to fight with an expert like Wu Songlong. "Don't worry, I won't bully you. We'll only compete with sword intent and nothing else." Unexpectedly, Wu Songlong smiled and said, "As long as you can defeat me, I'll tell you a secret about Dong Huang Jingrong. Nie Tian's eyebrows furrowed in surprise. Although Dong Huang Jingrong had stayed in the Sword Alliance before, not many people knew his identity from Jian Zong and Zhu Zheng's words. How did Wu Songlong know about Dong Huang Jingrong? Chapter 4733. Baidu search Luan Xian Shu Stable updates the fastest. Nie Tian, what I am going to tell you is a top secret regarding Dong Huang Jingrong. Wu Songlong looked at Nie Tian and laughed. I'm afraid even the sword sect doesn't know about this. Are you familiar with Senior Dong Huang? Nie Tian calmed down a little and asked with a faint smile. It's more than that. I was the one who introduced him to the Sword Alliance. Wu Songlong smiled proudly and said, I won't brag. In the entire Sword Alliance, I know Dong Huang Jingrong the best. So, Senior Wu is an old friend of Senior Dong Huang. Seeing Wu Songlong's excited expression, Nie Tian smiled faintly and bowed. You don't have to be so polite. Just call me Big Brother Wu. Wu Songlong, on the other hand, was very straightforward. He laughed and took a step forward. Instantly, a sword aura surged around him and he said, Let's begin. Nie Tian shook his head slightly and could not help but smile. If he addressed Wu Songlong as Big Brother, what would happen to Bai Ziqiu? However, this Wu Songlong was quite interesting. His temperament suited Nie Tian's taste. Since Big Brother Wu insists, then I shall respectfully comply. After thinking for a moment, Nie Tian smiled faintly, and a sharp sword aura shot out, piercing through the sky. Such a sharp sword chi! Wu Songlong's eyes suddenly darkened and his expression turned serious. He could not help but exclaim in surprise. As a Grandmaster Swordsman of the Nine Lakes Sword Alliance, and a first-rate powerhouse of the prison, Wu Songlong had seen countless geniuses in the way of the sword. However, compared to Nie Tian, those people were like a jackdaw compared to a divine phoenix, or a loach compared to an azure dragon. They were not worth mentioning at all. Even though Wu Songlong was mentally prepared, he was still extremely shocked when he truly witnessed Nie Tian's sword intent. Brother Wu, your sword intent is not bad either. Nie Tian smiled faintly. The sword will around him surged like a sharp blade. The sharpness of his aura seemed to be able to tear through the void. However, Wu Songlong's sword intent was as vigorous as the sea. Standing in front of him, it was as if he was facing a boundless ocean. Brat, this sentence of yours is neither bad nor bad, but it makes me, old Wu, very uncomfortable. Wu Songlong laughed maniacally. His sword aura surged once again. It was majestic and powerful like a tsunami. The pressure seemed to be able to subdue the heavens and earth. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He did not expect Wu Songlong's sword intent to be so powerful. It seemed that this forthright Grandmaster Swordsman in front of him had some strength. If that's the case, then I'll have to offend you. In the next moment, Nie Tian's face darkened. The celestial demon's sword intent in his body erupted. Sword chi surged wildly in the air like a storm, sweeping everything in its path. Come on, don't hold back. Wu Songlong laughed maniacally again. His body suddenly shook and a huge sword aura surged out. It was like a beast tide that pressed down on Nie Tian. Boom! The enormous sword intent was like a tempestuous wave, oppressing the heavens and the earth to the point of rumbling incessantly. Nie Tian's eyes darkened and the celestial demon's sword chi exploded. There was no sword, it was like a dragon's roar that shook the heavens and earth. Bang! In the next moment, the two sword auras collided with each other. There was a loud explosion in the air and the heavens and earth shook. Nie Tian's body trembled slightly and then he stood firm. On the other hand, Wu Songlong retreated for a few meters before he managed to stabilize himself. Brother Wu, are you all right? Nie Tian saw that Wu Songlong's face was flushed and he quickly asked. I'm fine. Wu Songlong was a little embarrassed. He waved his hand and took a deep breath. Only then did he look better. Without a doubt, Nie Tian had won the battle of sword intent. Nie Tian, your talent in sword intent is stronger than Dong Huang Jingrong's. Wu Tsang-lang let out a long sigh and smiled bitterly. He shook his head and said, I never thought that I, Wu Tsang-lang, would be no match for Dong Huang Jingrong, and now I've lost to his disciple. Brother Wu, you're exaggerating. Nie Tian's lips twitched and he said, We're only competing in sword intent. If we were to fight for real, I might not be a match for you. Ha ha. Wu Tsang-lang could not help but laugh and said, No matter what, I'm still a master swordsman. If I'm weaker than a junior like you, wouldn't it be too embarrassing? Nie Tian nodded slightly and smiled faintly. Although Wu Tsang-lang had suppressed his cultivation level in the battle of sword intent, Nie Tian had also held back. Otherwise, if Nie Tian had used his full strength, Wu Tsang-lang would have been seriously injured. Moreover, Nie Tian felt that Wu Tsang-lang's strength was roughly equivalent to the high-level heavenly martial divine ancestor in the all-heaven sacred world. With Nie Tian's current cultivation level of heavenly enlightenment stage 5, if he fought with all his might, he might not lose to Wu Tsang-lang. Brother Wu, can you tell me about Senior Dong Huang now? Nie Tian could not help but take the initiative to ask as he was thinking about Dong Huang Jingrong. Don't worry, I'm a man of my words. I'll definitely fulfill my promise to you. Wu Tsang-lang laughed but did not mention anything about Dong Huang Jingrong. Nie Tian frowned and was about to ask further when he saw two figures flying over from afar. Bai Ziqiu. Nie Tian looked carefully and saw that one of them was Bai Ziqiu and the other was a young man in a yellow shirt. He was tall and handsome. Brother Nie. Bai Ziqiu saw Nie Tian from afar and shouted excitedly. Nie Tian smiled faintly and nodded, but his eyes were attracted by the young man in a yellow shirt. The man in yellow shirt looked very young and seemed to be a few years younger than Bai Ziqiu. However, his aura was extremely powerful. Even though he could conceal it, he was still much stronger than Bai Ziqiu. Bai Ziqiu, is he the person you were talking about? As the two figures descended, the man in yellow shirt looked gloomy as he glanced at Nie Tian and asked coldly. Nie Tian could not help but frown. He was very uncomfortable with the man in yellow's arrogant attitude. Yes, he's Nie Tian, the peerless genius you were talking about. Bai Ziqiu was very excited and said with a smile. Peerless genius? The man in yellow shirt frowned and sneered, his eyes full of disdain. Nie Tian, this is my friend, Xing Yichen. Bai Ziqiu felt that Xing Yichen's expression was a little strange, but he still said with a smile. Nie Tian pursed his lips and nodded at Xing Yichen with a smile. He suddenly remembered that when he met Sword Alliance swordsman Fong Nan in Nine Leaf Town, the latter had mentioned this name. Xing Yichen and Zhua Kunlun were the two strongest among the 9 princes of the prison. It was no wonder that Xing Yichen was so domineering and condescending as soon as he arrived. It seemed that he was used to being a genius and liked to look down on others. I heard that you're very strong? Xing Yichen crossed his arms and glanced at Nie Tian from the corner of his mouth. I don't know if I'm strong or not. Nie Tian smiled. The corner of his mouth curled up into a cold smile. But you're definitely no match for me. Baidu search Luan Bulletin, Luan Bulletin. Chapter 4734. The atmosphere at the surging wave peak was extremely tense. Nie Tianling glanced at Xing Yichen with a disdainful and provocative look. Since the other party was being so arrogant, there was no need for him to be polite. Is that so? Xing Yichen's expression darkened as he said coldly, If you're so confident, why don't we have a duel? Following this, a mystical force surged from his body, emitting a sharp aura. A duel with me? Nie Tian let out a cold grin and said indifferently, You're not worthy. His voice was not loud, but it sounded like thunder in Xing Yichen's ears, causing him to become enraged. He was one of the 9 princes of the prison of punishments, and one of the two strongest among them. Ever since he was young, he had countless halos above his head. Everyone looked at him with either admiration or admiration. Sometimes, he even felt like he was standing at the peak of the prison of punishment. Yet now, someone younger than him had said that he was not worthy of a duel. How could he endure such humiliation? Brother Xing, calm down. Bai Ziqiu immediately stepped forward to stop Xing Yichen and advised, "This is the first time we've met. There's no grudge between us, there's no need to be angry. There was no grudge before, but there is now." However, Xing Yichen didn't give up. He let out a low roar, and his aura surged like raging waves, transforming into an enormous oppressive force that enveloped Nie Tian. Nie Tian, however, wore a calm expression on his face, as if he couldn't feel it at all. No matter how the raging waves pressed down on him, he didn't budge an inch. Xing Yichen's heart sank when he saw this. He was quite surprised. His cultivation was at the peak of the Earth's strange realm. Even a genius like Bai Ziqiu would find it difficult to withstand the pressure at such a close distance. However, Nie Tian did not seem to be affected at all. This was enough to prove that his strength far surpassed Bai Ziqiu's. No wonder Bai Ziqiu held him in such high regard. Bang! At that moment, Nie Tian's figure shuddered slightly. A powerful force burst out from his body and broke through the pressure around him. Xing Yichen's body swayed as he withstood the impact. Only by forcefully withstanding it did he not retreat. However, his face was red and bloodshot. It was obvious that he was having a hard time holding it in, and he looked extremely miserable. "Brother Nie, forget it." Seeing this, Bai Ziqiu hurriedly stood between the two of them, looked at Nie Tian awkwardly and said, "We are all going to participate in the Sky Pillar plan, so we will still be partners in the future." "I didn't want to do it. He forced me." Nie Tian smiled faintly, his face cold. Even though Xing Yichen was an expert at the peak of the Earth Qi realm, he was still an idiot in his eyes. Just because he thought he had a bit of talent, he acted all high and mighty, wishing he could walk sideways with 3 legs. Nie Tian hated this kind of so-called genius the most. Without that layer of genius, he was just a fool. A sparrow under the eaves does not know the immensity of the sky. A frog at the bottom of a well does not know the immensity of the sky. Shut up! At this moment, Xing Yichen had already flown into a rage. His power surged madly around him, giving rise to the momentum of raging waves. Eyes bloodshot, he stared coldly at Nie Tian and growled, "Do you really think I'll lose to you?" Boom! As soon as he finished, his aura skyrocketed, causing the surrounding space to rumble. "You don't know what's good for you." Nie Tian frowned, and his expression turned cold, and said in a deep voice, "Today, I will show you how weak you really are. How presumptuous." Xing Yichen let out a roar as if he had gone mad. He slammed his palm forward, and an endless amount of energy swept across the sky, turning into endless waves that pressed down on Nie Tian. 14-inch this, Bai Ziqiu retreated at a great speed, and looked at Wu Songlong with an unpleasant expression. However, Wu Songlong had a smile on his face, and had no intention of stopping him. The truth was, he did not like these geniuses from the purgatory community. These people were very talented, but they were not at an unimaginable level. If they were as insane as Nie Tian, capable of subverting everyone's understanding of the martial Tao, then it would not be an exaggeration for them to be arrogant. Most importantly, they were not truly heaven-defying geniuses, but they put on airs every day. It was really annoying. This time, it was not a bad idea to let Nie Tian teach Xing Yichen a lesson. Die! At this moment, Xing Yichen was close to going mad. His eyes were filled with murderous intent, and his face was ferocious as he roared. Boom! His aura suddenly erupted, and the power of the waves swept across the sky. It was terrifying. "You're courting death." Nie Tian could not help but frown as he sensed the pressure coming from the void, and his voice turned cold. He had thought that Xing Yichen was just a little arrogant, but he did not expect the latter to have such a strong murderous nature. Whoosh! In the next instant, Nie Tian stomped on the ground, and a gust of sword intent whizzed out. The sword's radiance was as dazzling as the stars, and it forcefully sliced the waves apart. At that instant, Xing Yichen's expression changed as he felt a sharp aura rushing at him. At that moment, he felt a chill, and a sense of death approaching. He wanted to retreat, but it was too late. Whoosh! In the next moment, the sword light tore through the sky. Everywhere it passed, it swept through everything in its path, and it completely shattered the violent waves. Bang! Following that, Xing Yichen did not have time to react. His body shuddered, and he was sent flying, landing heavily on a stone pillar that was a few meters thick. Xing Yichen! Bai Ziqiu could not help but exclaim when he saw this. Wu Songlong frowned as well, and he looked at Nie Tian with a strange expression. He initially thought that this was just a battle between youngsters, but he did not expect Nie Tian to be so heavy-handed. Moreover, Nie Tian's strength had exceeded his expectations, and he was greatly shocked. Based on the strength that Nie Tian had displayed, it would not be easy for him to completely suppress Nie Tian. At that moment, Xing Yichen stood up with a disheveled expression. You? He glared at Nie Tian with eyes full of hatred. He was about to say something, but he spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face was as pale as a sheet. The impact just now had seriously injured him. I've already said that you're not fit to compete with me. Nie Tian's expression was Bai Ziqiu's. If you weren't Bai Ziqiu's friend, you would be a corpse by now. Xing Yichen was indignant. He wanted to speak again, but his qi and blood surged, and he almost spat out another mouthful of blood. Xing Yichen, don't speak. Hurry up and recuperate. Bai Ziqiu came to Xing Yichen's side and helped him up. Xing Yichen was extremely indignant, but he still took a deep breath and said no more. Nie Tian, you know that he's no match for you, but you still attacked him so heavily. That's a little too much. Wu Songlong looked at Nie Tian and paused for a moment, but he could not help but say,